Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Indra in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 51, Slaves. Hello, Sakura-san. Niji nodded, his face as impassible as ever, voice almost gentle. It clashed terribly with the angry, bulging veins around his eyes. Sakura felt like screaming. Why the hell are you so calm? What the fuck are you doing with Akatsuki? Just what? What are you doing here? Came out, instead. Isn't it obvious? He shrugged. Finishing the job. He pointed at Naruto. What do you want from him? The rest of the 9 tails. Indra-san has it, apparently. We didn't expect this sort of meeting today, but it would be foolish to ignore the opportunity presented to us. Naruto said nothing, staring at him, unmoving, instead. You don't have to get involved, of course. Niji continued. Let me take care of our Jinchuriki problem, and you're free to go. As an old Konoha comrade. You left Konoha? She said, realizing how hypocritical that was. A few years ago, yes. Niji acknowledged. His eyes hardened. Would you stay in a place that allowed your own family to enslave you? For that matter, would you stay with this kind of family? He stressed the word. Of course she wouldn't. I'm not blaming you. I left even before, and I didn't have it half as rough. She said. Niji nodded. I'm glad you feel that way. Just because I disagree with village and clan politics. He said with distaste. Doesn't mean I have anything against you. We were all slaves, if in a different way. Naruto said nothing at this. She knew he agreed. No matter. I can't let you take Indra. She said, remembering to use whatever name Niji thought was his real identity. Step aside, Sakura-san. I'd rather not hurt you, but I will, if I have to. Niji said, indifferent. Oh? You won't hurt me. She shot back, voice hard. I'd like to see you try. Niji sighed. It happened so fast that she would have missed it if she had blinked. Niji blurred forward, wreathed in yellow lightning. Naruto intercepted him, clad in blue. The only difference was that Niji's aura covered him entirely, while Naruto could only manage his legs and something else at the same time. Which meant that he had to choose between enhancing his weapons, or his arms. Either meant that right now, he didn't have enough cutting power to even go through Niji's shield. And if he did the opposite, he wouldn't be fast enough to reach him. Water was weak against lightning, so most of her jutsu were out of the question. She sent her spectral hand through the ground, and it came out under Niji's feet to anchor him in place. The electricity went through, of course, and Sakura winced. Naruto! She shouted. I'm on it. Wind-natured chakra coursed through his blade. This was his way around the problem. His second blade aimed to cut Niji diagonally. Niji's arm seemed to disappear. 8 trigrams, lightning palm. A wave of air and electricity slammed into Sakura, paralyzing her. She couldn't move at all, her every limb stiffening. The spectral arm faded into nothing, and Niji stepped away from Naruto. He reappeared 10 meters away, turning his lightning aura down. He's saving chakra. Sakura realized. Naruto moved right next to her, defending her while she slowly recovered her mobility. She put a hand to the ground, marking it. He doesn't have the reserves to keep it up at all times. She said to Naruto. He gave her a somewhat amused glance, despite the situation. You'll find that most people don't. I can afford to, but I'm a bit of a special case. Don't let it go to your head. She grunted, her eye on Niji. He's better at using it than I am, anyway. He shrugged. Are you alright? I'll manage. 'Cause I might need your help. This guy might be as good as Zabuza. Niji slowly walked toward them. Surrender. There is no way out for you, Indra-san. Oh? Why not? Naruto shot back. You can't escape my eyes. Naruto cackled. Sakura cracked an hesitant grin. Is this something you find amusing? Niji raised an eyebrow. Nah. It's just I've heard this from every Fancy Eyes clan, by now. Naruto said. In this sense, you're very Hyuga. This might not have been the best thing to say. Neji frowned. On a Hyuga, this might as well mean fury. Be as it may, you won't dash. Escape my fate, yeah, got it. Big talk. Naruto mocked. What are you doing? She whispered to him. This might not be the best time to pull a Kakashi. Naruto ignored her, continuing. Maybe you could give me a few tips about running away from my inescapable destiny, please. What did they offer you? A way to remove the thing on your forehead. Neji disappeared again. Naruto was ready this time. Wind rushed around him and into his swords, making him lighter and faster. The lightning nature, he focused through his legs entirely. Gentle step, lightning roar. The yellow chakra focused around Neji's hands changed shape, turning into tiger-shaped shrouds. Naruto's hands went even faster, and he blocked them. Sakura saw surprise flash across his face, and he leaped away, swords showing no sign of the wind energy he had poured into them. These things absorb chakra. He groaned. Even someone like you can tell that much, then. Neji taunted. I didn't think you even knew how to shit talk. Naruto poured more chakra into his swords. I usually don't bother speaking with dead men. Same here. Why don't you come and back up your claims, then? Naruto rushed forward. Neji's eyes could be everywhere at the same time, but it required a different level of focus. The very real threat of Naruto meant his focus was likely on him, and her current position. Before Neji's shroud reappeared, Sakura created a second portal where she was. It was likely the first time Neji really saw her use it, if the surprise on his face was any indication. She appeared behind him, slashing through his back diagonally. The dimmed shroud appeared again, but a bit too late, as she had managed to wound him lightly. She disappeared again into the portal, and he used lightning to cauterize his wound. This wouldn't work again, most likely. Naruto opted to throw his wind-enhanced swords, in another move that took Neji by surprise. Then he jumped, bow unsealing, and 3 arrows of wind flew. Neji deflected all of the projectiles, but the wind arrows opened wounds along his arms, despite his armor. He grunted. Then the homemade well, made by Karen Tag Sakura had slipped through the portal exploded behind him. He came out of the smoke at a high speed, but not entirely unscathed. Naruto punched him in the face, with a solid, wind-powered right hook. Before Neji could recover, he summoned a sword out of thin air. The slash missed him, and he let the sword fall, coming up with a rising vertical spinning kick. The wind howled, and Neji had to use his wrists to shield himself from its hungry blades. He deactivated his shroud again, since lightning was weak to wind and would only result in him getting more injured. Sakura's spectral hand went through the portal, holding Neji in place. This should prevent him from using the Kaiden. Well, she hoped. Then she went through it herself and grabbed one of Naruto's discarded swords. The chakra-conductive blade answered her. Instead of using water, which she was more comfortable with, she focused on her weaker affinity with earth. It was better suited for blunt attacks, since her sword wouldn't penetrate his armor anyway. She slammed the sword in the ground, burying it up to the hilt. Then she pulled it out, covered with rocks. Neji was fighting Naruto and 2 of his clones, who prevented him from leaving the spot they were fighting in. That and the ghost hand wrapped around his ankle. The Hyuga was also trying to gather his chakra around his right arm, in something that was starting to look like 3 floating claws made out of pure yellow electricity. Naruto never gave him enough time to complete them, keeping him on the ropes with wind attacks. Neji parried Naruto's strike, and answered it with a palm strike to the gut that he barely managed to deflect, by slapping his hand away. Naruto held a bird sign with his other hand. Wind style, quickening. It was not aimed at himself, as Neji had thought, but at Sakura. She felt herself become lighter, the wind carrying her along. It felt like gliding over the floor, to some degree. Sakura's blunt rock sword hammer had a longer reach, and she managed to slam it against Neji's wrist. He winced, but managed to turn on his shroud again, avoiding it getting broken. That was what Naruto had been waiting on. Sakura could see a bright light coming from under his collarbone. Wind. Gale blitz. Raw wind-natured chakra swirled around Niji, her spectral hand keeping him there. Then it started to swirl around him, destroying the clones and cutting into Niji's armor easily. Too easily for Niji, apparently, since he turned his shroud off, once more. Sakura could not maintain her ghost hand in the cutting winds either, and she had to dispel it. Chakra poured out of all of Niji's tenketsu, and he started spinning. His chitin had only grown more powerful, the rotation shielding him from the wind tornado altogether. Naruto breathed hard, but he was somewhat amused. He continued to pour more chakra in the hurricane. He won't be able to stop spinning if he doesn't want to get shredded, he said. Then he stiffened. But I think Zabuza is coming, and you're injured. We need to go. Now. He's not nearly as fast as Niji. She nodded. She wasn't sure she could even fight against Niji, right now. They definitely wouldn't be able to manage fighting both at the same time. Naruto created 3 clones. All 4 of them started channeling more wind chakra in the tornado, forcing Niji to keep his rotation up. Then the real Naruto picked her up, channeling whatever wind chakra he still could mold after that, before adding lightning to it. He dashed off when Zabuza arrived into the clearing, howling. Naruto leaped from tree to tree, branches exploding in his wake, flying to where the mist was thinner, too fast for Zabuza to follow. He was getting somewhat low on chakra at this point, and carrying Sakura only added more to his exhaustion. But she was just as exhausted, he knew. She looked a bit pale, and for the first time, he realized how small she felt in his arms. Zabuza slammed a fist into a tree. Niji made short work of the remaining clones, before dusting himself off. They got away, then. He said, simply. Next time. Zabuza grunted. I will make sure to cut a leg or 2 on the blonde. Do as you wish. But later. Oh? Since when do you presume you can order me around? Zabuza glared at the younger man. We still have a mission to finish. Niji stared back. Your sword can wait. They glared at each other. Let's get going, then. Zabuza gritted out. We still have a few more islands left. Niji nodded. He didn't always like working with the man, but he could at least keep his priorities straight. Once they had put several kilometers between themselves and the Akatsuki duo, or rather, when Naruto was running so low on stamina that he had to Naruto warped back to UMI. Sakura carried both of them across the water, and he leaned on her. They fell in the sand, breathing hard. That had been way too close to a disaster. Sasuke was right. Naruto broke the silence. Sakura looked at him, too tired to even answer. Niji's a fucking dick. Sakura snorted. They went back to the house, dragging their feet in doing so. Next time we go back to Mist. Sakura started. You really want to go back? He asked. Maybe the mark we have there already is enough. It's too far away. She shook her head. We'll go again, in a few days. I feel like dying, right now. I can help, if you want. He grinned. Fuck off. She grunted. Karen. Karen. Naruto called. He knew she was likely not there, since he could not feel her chakra, but he tried anyway. Someone called with a weak voice from up the stairs. He knew who it was, of course. He closed his eyes. Prepare for a long discussion. He whispered to Sakura. She squeezed his hand for support. They climbed up. It was time to meet with Ino. Ino was staring at Naruto, still unsure what to think. She had not lied to him, she had figured who he was early on. Still, seeing the boy she had only known as Sarutobi Naruto. As this hulking blonde man was disconcerting, to say the least. And not just because physically, he looked nothing like the 13-year-old she remembered, aside from his expression. Both he and Sakura's clothes were torn, multiple healed wounds covering their bodies. Even though she was in the room, her mind kept looping back to one of the worst days in her life, the worst being, of course, Shikaku telling her the news about her dad. The torture had been bad. Worse than she expected, by far. Danzo, and she was almost sure it was him, since he was the one in charge of Root, unless he too had been killed, had left nothing to chance. She shivered. She had spent around 2 days in his tender care, she estimated. More than enough to break any lesser person. She knew she could expect some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Many shinobi dealt with it, and as a Yamanaka, she was as well equipped to manage as anyone was, if it ever came to it. They had tried to break her, after all. She hadn't said anything. Unfortunately, this didn't make the torture hut any less or made her more capable of enduring the trauma. Nobody was impervious to torture. It just meant she was way harder to break than most people. There were a few ways she had used to hold on. Shutting her mind off was one. Removing her psyche from her physical body. Yamanaka were trained in this. They were hypnotized by their clan elders, who imprinted a psyche into their minds that manifested itself when a specific mode of stimulation was applied. For example, pain inflicted on their body, their mind swapped to a separate persona to endure the torture. A bit like applied schizophrenia. Then they'd revert back to the original when the torture ended. Hopefully. Another way was shutting off their senses by focusing the pain elsewhere. Focusing on a mantra, recounting a story over and over again. As a Yamanaka, everything was about the mind, and how little anybody truly knew of it. So this had helped with the physical part. And she had known they needed her alive, that they wouldn't kill her. At least not before they had found something. She just had to hold. Until what or when, she didn't know for sure. But physical torture had mental effects. The whole idea of it was to elicit, train a behavior that wasn't there. Confuse, remove hope from the target. The sleep deprivation, and waterboarding at random intervals had gotten to her, though. To her, this had been way worse than the more physical sort. Struggling for every breath. Being choked by water, being allowed to breathe, being choked with water. Again and again. You couldn't even take complete breaths, as the imbalance between carbon dioxide and oxygen meant you reached oxygen starvation easily enough. You were being drowned. Except it didn't end up in the usual blissful coma. Over time, you were looking at damage to the lungs, heart, and brain. Mentally. You were fucked. PTSD, severe mental distress, paranoia, suicidal tendencies, self-harm, dissociation and numerous other effects could appear in some people. And she was definitely lost in thought. She knew all of this from the get-go and had been as prepared as she could. Hopefully that would prove to be enough. Ino could still not move on her own, her tendons having been cut. Which would have been something she would have felt even more hopelessness about, but Karen, this godsend, had assured her that they would be able to heal her. So, back to the room. She tried to put on her confident face. It probably looked bad. Naruto seemed like he barely held back a wince, and Sakura's hand was tapping nervously on the floorboards, a childhood habit she apparently had never managed to get rid of. Naruto had likely gotten her in this mess in the first place. Not willingly, of course. She wasn't sure if Danzo had orchestrated the whole thing, but she wouldn't put it past him. Her timing had been terrible, if so. In the wrong place, at the wrong moment. She still couldn't figure what Naruto had been doing in the holding cells, either. Wait, was Naruto even his name? She knew nothing about him. Things had changed very quickly, once he had appeared in the village. Sarutobi was dealing under the table, the Hokage was dead, Danzo was likely in charge. And apparently she was a wanted criminal. She had felt like crying, when Karen told her. But Naruto, or Indra, whoever he was now, had also pulled her out of this mess, even though he had done so in the most brutal way she could think of. What had happened to the sweet boy who refused to kill? Realistically, she knew she couldn't have gone back to the village anyway. One reason was that she would never trust anybody who let Danzo pull this sort of shit to anybody under suspicion. The second one being that no matter what she had known, she probably would have gotten killed. Villages didn't like loose ends, no matter how talented or useful. Naruto had gotten her involved, by no real fault of his own. He had also saved her. She sighed. Things had been pretty easy. Once, Yamanaka Ino, 13 years old, loved Sarutobi Naruto. Ino broke the silence, her voice raspy but firm. She tried to look strong, so that they would not notice how close to the edge she really was. Tell me what happened. All of it. No more secrets. Chapter 52, No Way Back. Naruto nodded, holding back a sigh. Sure. It might be a bit long, though. It's the least you owe me. Ino added. She didn't even have to try to guilt-trip him, since well, he already felt guilty. And she was right, he owed her this much. He sent a clone to go prepare some tea. Where do I even start? He scratched the back of his head. Ino noticed, and a flash of recognition passed through her eyes. Did he do this often? He wondered. Why don't you start at the moment you disappeared? She doesn't know anything, right now. Sakura tried. Yeah, you might remember this as the moment you left a few people who cared about you in the dark. Ino supplied helpfully. And a girl who was waiting for you, too, if you can remember that much. He winced. Ah. I'll get the tea, guys. Sakura said. I've got a clone on it. He begged her to stay with his eyes. Nonsense. Let me take care of it. She insisted. Fucking traitor. You could trust her with your life. Not so much with private matters, apparently. She ran out of the room. He felt her dispel his clone with a swift kick. Ino stared at him, still, some dark amusement well hidden in her baby blue eyes. So? She asked, voice still weak, belying the fire in her gaze. You look pretty calm. He said lamely. She snorted. I have had all the time in the world to curse your name in the past few days. Even more in these sewers they call holding cells. She rasped out. If we had this discussion a few days ago. Yes, I'd probably be angry. More than now. She glared at him. I think I'm ready for a civil discussion now. Also, I think the painkillers are mellowing me out. I'll decide how I feel after your tale, so make it a good one. Water, please. He held the straw in front of her mouth. She nodded in thanks. How polite of her. I think I get it. Naruto said. Good. Stop wasting time, then. Did Toru or Sasuke say something about what happened in the Land of Wind? Toru told me you died. She said simply. And getting Sasuke to speak about this one is like trying to get info from a wall. One that hates to talk about it. She snorted. Ah. Well. He cleared his voice. The mission in the desert went, well. He finished lamely. Ino was not impressed. Then we got ambushed by Gaara. We beat him, and I killed him. Ino frowned. You did? What happened to the no-killing thing? Well, she didn't mention the night in the holding cells, at least. He was already dying, I think, so I finished him. Crushed his face with my staff. I thought it was the safest option at the time. For all of us. I see. Then the Biju inside him broke free. Well, it was about to. We sealed it within Sasuke, instead. That too, seemed like the best course of action. You're the one who did it, then. Sasuke had never said much about it, and Toru followed. I just copied the former seal and. He interrupted himself. Did he ever have any trouble with it? Not past the first months. Jiraiya-sama. Jiraiya helped him at first, and then he did something to it with his Sharingan. Good. Good. Naruto nodded in relief. And then? Then I had my first meeting with Akatsuki. Tea's ready, guys. Sakura entered, carrying a tray, and sitting next to Ino, who likely wouldn't be able to drink it on her own. Naruto shot her an unimpressed look. Sakura at least had the grace to look sheepish. So, they extracted the 9 tails from you, the 9 fucking tails. It was supposed to be dead. But, let me get this right, they didn't get it out fully. Then Lord Fourth, who turns out to be your father. She closed her eyes in consternation. Talked to you from inside your belly, possessed you, killed some S-rank guy, before jumping out of the Yahiko Tower. Ino asked, eyebrows raised so high they looked as though they were trying to leave her face entirely. Yeah. She glanced at Sakura for confirmation, and she nodded. Huh. That's wild. She motioned for Sakura to hold the teacup to her lips. Thanks, Sakura. I guess so. It felt pretty surreal at the time, and I didn't have much time to think during. Naruto admitted. His life had been pretty weird, overall. As strange as that whole day must have been. It doesn't really explain where you went after that. I tried to use the hydration, because I saw my father use it just before. Also, I was falling to my death, and didn't know any other option. Why didn't you just transform into a bird or something? Ino asked, frowning. You've done it before. There was somebody after me, they would have killed me, I'm sure. Also, he just hadn't thought of it at the time. Panic apparently had made him get tunnel vision. Okay. So where did you land, that prevented you from coming back? 3 years and some into the future. She laughed. Then she saw his serious face. For real? She gaped at him. It's a space-time jutsu. He shrugged, as though this explained everything. I fucked up several aspects at the same time. Especially the time part. Actually, maybe I'm not the only one. Did nobody ever bother trying to recreate hydration? One guy in IWA came close, years ago, apparently. Sakura supplied. But, there's nothing else mentioned about him. Maybe he'll appear out of nowhere in a few decades, who knows? Naruto tried to joke. It fell flat. Rough audience. Or maybe he just died. Don't know which one is the most likely option. You could still have come back. Ino said, eyes hard, but looking a bit less angry. 3 years. It's bad, but better than 5 years. I didn't plan on coming back. He admitted with a wince. There was one thing I needed to do, but nobody needed to see me for it. I figured that all of you guys, kinda moved on. Coming back, when I had no intention of staying felt even more cruel. Ino muttered something he didn't get. What is it? You're such a bastard. Ino ground out. Sakura chose this moment to slowly fade away through a portal. I'm sorry. I said you're a bastard. She repeated, before coughing. A selfish one. There were plenty of ways you could have told us you had survived, at least. It was too risky. He retorted hotly. Konoha has ways of forcing people back into servitude. Ask any Hyuga about it. As a Jinchuriki, even one with less than 1/9 of the full Nine Tails power, they would have forced me to fight for them. A slave in all but name, an unwilling protector and dash. Isn't this what you're doing now anyway? Killing, fighting, and who knows what else. Ino shot back. That was a low blow. I'm fighting for my own freedom. Fighting and killing, still, that much is true. He gritted out. But not for someone else's goals. The only thing I want is to be left to lead my life in peace, without madmen trying to destroy me, the people I care about, and the world. Naruto said, a bit more vehemently than he had hoped. What about the people you cared about in Konoha, huh? Her voice raised in volume as well. What about us? What about me? What did we matter to you? All of you moved on. He tried. This was the best I could offer you. I mourned you. I swore that I would never. That I would never. That you would never what, exactly? He said, eyes closed. We were 13 back then. I never expected anything to dash. And when I found out you lived, I hated you for leaving. So fucking much. She gritted out, looking as though she still wanted to punch him, at least. Then she sniffled. When he looked at her face, she was blinking some tears away, angrily. Maybe that got through to him. He understood her pain, maybe he always had to some degree. And she was right. There were plenty of ways he could have told her, at least. She would never have told the Hokage, knowing how he felt about things. Or even Toru. Maybe Sasuke, too. Shit. Maybe he really had been wrong. Ino. He interrupted. Go fuck yourself. She sniffled, and then tried to hide it from him. I am truly sorry, he said. Then, he surprised her, bowing until his head touched the ground. You are right. I was afraid. Afraid of coming back. And I hated the village, the system. Because of the reasons I told you. And so, I wasn't willing to take any chances. Even if it meant that you would all suffer for it. For this, I am sorry. Stop. Please, stop. She said. Don't try this shit with me. But her voice was wobbling. I meant every word I said. He answered, slowly rising back to his knees. If I had to do it again, I would still not come back to the village. He saw her face darken, and continued before she could say anything. But I would have found a way to tell you. So you could at least have some closure. He concluded. You never cared, did you? About me? She asked. You just disappeared. I thought you were dead for years. No. That's just not true. I cared about you. And I still do, actually. Never stopped. He said, looking into her eyes. Why? She asked. Why what? Why? Why didn't you take me with you? Then she seemed to realize what she had said, looking mortified, before the tears started to flow. Oh no. He definitely wasn't great with crying people. A crying Ino, even less. I loved you. I would have done anything for you. She finally admitted, crying. Ino. He took her into his arms, unsure what to say. She stiffened, but let him hold her. Sakura came back to Ino leaning against Naruto's frame, as he was serving her tea. They were both looking somewhat tense, though. You guys are done? She asked, with only her head visible in the doorway. I expected something more violent. Ino lifted her lame hands. Even if I wanted to. I don't think I can. Sakura winced. Fair enough. She definitely had been crying, too. Sakura was glad they had at least found some neutral ground. And that she didn't have to deal with a crying Ino. Thanks for the support there, Sakura. Naruto said, dryly. Ah. No need to thank me. She waved off. Are we all good? Ino glared at her. Naruto did something fucking stupid, but I can somewhat understand his reasons. Ah. Yeah. Sakura nodded weakly. What about you, though? Couldn't even send a few letters. Ino shot. Sakura looked toward Naruto for help, who just looked away. Bastard. So you had a fight with your parents and you decided to leave? Ino frowned, her arms crossed. She looked pretty intimidating, but her sitting in between Naruto's legs, who dwarfed her, kinda ruined the effect. Sakura closed her eyes in consternation. It was more than just a disagreement. She muttered. Being a shinobi was all I wanted to do. What I trained for. A missing arm or an eye wasn't going to stop me. What would you have done, if your parents forced you to do anything? I would have bullied them into giving me what I wanted, of course. Or persuaded them. Ino shrugged. Well, I didn't manage. And I had no way of doing it on my own in Konoha. So I left when I found the opportunity. Did you realize how dangerous that was? Ino asked. Of course, I did. Sakura shot back. Well. She amended. I figured most of that out later, anyway. It was kind of a rushed decision. Ino said, unimpressed. I had a mentor. Someone who can protect you from what? Ino pretended to look at cue cards. Oh. The whole shinobi world. Fuck you, pig. Sakura muttered, looking away. Who was that guy, anyway? A man called Kiyoshi, from Suna. He taught me almost everything I know, and how to learn the rest, and train on my own. Kiyoshi? As in? An old man from Suna? Using puppets. Yeah, he was from there. Sakura nodded. Do you know how lucky you got? Ino rasped out. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought you read about this kind of stuff. That's one of the guys who made Suna's puppetry the danger it is now, with Chibo. Cho? Something like that. Oh? I thought he was just a sweet old man who used to be a ninja back then. Though sweet and ninja didn't really belong together. Especially not for older shinobi. He taught Sasori of the Red Sands, and Chigas 100 Hands. The former is suspected of having killed their former cage, and the latter might well become their next one. He didn't want to teach puppeteering to anyone. Sakura said, remembering the man. And he only taught me how to use the chakra threads shortly before he died. Considering what Sasori did, maybe he had a good reason for that. Ino guessed. If he still taught you that much. Well, he must have seen something in you. Kiyoshi-sensei. Sakura whispered, feeling as though the wound had reopened. Ino picked up on it. She sighed. Look. I'll give you shit about your disappearance another time, then. Not when you make that face. Very kind of you, Ino. Naruto said dryly. You shut up. I haven't forgiven you either. She shot back, now angry again. What? But I thought dash. SHH. He glared at her. Ino thought she probably looked more or less fine. Well, she felt pretty tense, almost electric in fact, alight with nervous energy. Never a good sign. But considering she just got out of a basement after a couple relaxing days of crippling torture, she thought she was doing okay. Then again, she only had a bit of time to process everything. The worst would come later, she knew. Keeping her mind on something else was the best way she knew to cope, filling the silence with chit-chat if she felt anxious. So she fell back on these patterns. Even if it meant blurting out a few things she really hadn't wanted to say out loud to him. Not now. Otherwise, she would think about all the things she didn't want to think about right now. Being a wanted criminal, likely not seeing her friends and family again. Ah, there she went. What happened after this whole time jump thing? She asked, trying not to show how fragile her grip on her sanity felt. Plus, Naruto's story was interesting, so there was that. It was a good distraction from her thoughts. And that's how I met Orochimaru. Naruto concluded. It's like he wants people to think he's creepy. Ino said. She looked somewhat calm, but he knew her better than this. He knew she was likely still very, very angry. He couldn't blame her, though. You have no idea how many times I thought the same. He snorted. In the 2 or so years after that, I trained mostly. Karen was working with him, and we met Sakura on a random mission. Really? Yeah, she was cosplaying as a vagrant samurai or something. It wasn't like that. Sakura said hotly, cheeks red. No. He teased easily. No. It's safer as a man, and the helmet allows me to disguise my voice. She retorted. I'm going to pretend it has nothing to do with you reading samurai romance as a kid. Shut up. She said hotly. Did you have a crush on handsome Tatsuya from the Forbidden Daisho? Naruto pushed more. I'm so going to beat your ass again tomorrow. She muttered, between her teeth. I think you were telling a story. Ino said, somewhat amused, despite herself. Yeah. Then we got on a boat dash. A boat? I've never been on a boat. Ino mused. What does this have to do with my story? He grunted. I want to do a boat trip too, then. Ino decided, glaring at him. He grunted again. He really didn't enjoy boats at all, and wasn't she mad at them anyway? That's how we settled on this archipelago. Long trip, a few hiccups on the way, too. He continued. Ino wasn't paying attention, likely distracted by idea of seeing the world on a boat. And that's how we got here. Now we're putting marks around the world, to travel back and forth if needed. Oh, so you could go back to Konoha, for example? She asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. He thought. In theory, yes. It would be way too dangerous, but you could likely meet someone elsewhere in the Land of Fire. Naruto assumed she was thinking about her family. They'd have to sort out a few security concerns first, though. Right now, Ino looked so relieved that he didn't feel like spoiling her cheer. How does that work, even? Ino asked. The teleporting thing. He could almost hear Orochimaru correcting him. Warping. Well, he wasn't there. Yeah. We put a sort of seal on people and they use natural energy to jump around on the network I made. Natural energy? I'll tell you the details later, if you want. What happens to the network if you die, for example? She asked. Look, you really shouldn't be trying to kill me already. She didn't laugh, so he moved on. Anyway, the network is basically out of my hands by now. Once a mark is permanent, well, it is permanent. I'm the only one who can create new ones, though. Ino nodded. We were trying to do exactly that in Mist, today. Sakura added. Met Akatsuki there, though. What? For real. Ino had heard a few things about the criminal organization before today, but had learned more about what they actually did in 5 minutes of conversation than she had in years, back in Konoha. A man named Zabuza, and Hyuga Niji. Naruto concluded. Niji. Ino breathed out. So that's where he went. What happened to him, exactly? He asked. Do you remember the exams, years ago? Where Sasuke stole some high-level Hyuga techniques. Seeing both of them nod, she continued. Both of them got in trouble for this, but Niji especially. But, why? Sakura asked. Because Hyuga have a tradition. Naruto said with distaste. You can call it slavery. The main house lives as the masters, and the branch house as their servants, basically. They are branded with a seal on the forehead, that the main house can use to punish, or kill them. Yes. And Niji comes from the branch house. The techniques he used, and lost to Sasuke, meaning to the Uchiha as a whole, were supposed to be a main house secret. I don't know what he went through, living with them, after that. Ino continued, shivering. But it probably was pretty bad, since he left the land of fire with a red-haired man, after knocking out both of his teammates. That was years ago. Chapter 53, Far from her home. Konoha's 6th Hokage, Shimura Danzo, declares martial law following ongoing clashes with Suna forces. Ino read out loud, cursing, 1 week later. The news came from one of the Land of Lightning's trustworthy newspapers. In UMI, which was far removed from the rest of the world, there were a few people in charge of acquiring information about continental matters. Not just through espionage, even though Orochimaru came with an extensive spy network. By the time every newspaper was talking about worldly events. What had just been rumors before could not be ignored anymore. Whether this was just a way for Danzo to enforce his rule over the village, or a true state of emergency would be confirmed over the coming weeks. Most likely, it was both. This is bad, isn't it? She let out weakly. I guess I'm not coming back to the Land of Fire at all, then. Danzo would probably have me executed before I can even set foot close to the village. Ino. Naruto winced. No. No. It's okay. She clumsily wiped a tear from her eye. My mother will be fine, anyway. She's a civilian. He squeezed her shoulder in support, and she let him. The others. Well, it's not as though I could protect them, even if I were there. She said. That doesn't mean you have to be fine with it. He said, looking at her. I'm sorry to hear it, too. She trembled. Yeah. It's okay to cry, if you feel like it. He said. That's what you used to say, right? Yeah. She sniffled. But He embraced her. Soon after, she was wailing against his chest. Sorry. It feels as though the only thing I'm doing is crying, these days. Ino said. Who would blame you for that? Just 10 days ago, she had been in Root's tender care. Naruto knew that if it had been him, he would be in a way worse mental shape. He had spent a lot of time with her over the last week, wanting to make sure she was alright. Besides a few moments of burning anger and rage, and some days where she just turned very cold, she really was doing incredibly well. Naruto didn't push her to talk, letting her do it on her own, and asking questions he hoped were not too insensitive. She had been talking with Anko a lot, who apparently had self-appointed herself as a therapist. It seemed to be helping. No matter how talented Ino was in regards to the human mind, she could not exactly do this on her own. Even Orochimaru himself had spent some time to speak with Ino, which had surprised almost everybody. Besides Naruto, because he knew that the man saw the use in having a Yamanaka around, especially one as talented as Ino was. And he seemed to know many things about trauma, which Naruto didn't really feel like dwelling on too much. In time, Ino would be fine, Naruto knew. The physical part would take a while to heal too, which could take from 1 to 2 months, even with Orochimaru and Karen's help. Knowing Ino as well as he did, he knew she was bored out of her mind, being confined to this room, and only being allowed to walk around with casts around her feet. Fine motor control was also out, for the time being. As if she could sense what he was thinking, Ino broke the silence. "Can you help me get out?" she asked hesitantly. "Out where? I've not been out of this house for more than a week." Ino grunted. I don't know if you're supposed to. Please. I'm getting crazy over here." He sighed. "All right. I'll carry you, then." Naruto walked around with Ino, carrying her piggyback style. "This place is huge," she said, her eyes taking in the sights around them. They were currently climbing a mountain path at a steady pace. Well, Naruto was walking at a steady pace, technically. Not that it was very hard, even with Ino on his back, she was pretty light. It was still morning, at around 10. Blue skies, filled with sparse, lazy clouds, stood above them. The path they were on was overlooking the lake, and Orochimaru's spire, which seemed even taller from here. "Wait until you see the rest, this is not even the biggest island." He grinned. "There are others." "Well, it's an archipelago, after all." To be fair, the place was a true wonder. It offered endless opportunities to be amazed, and Naruto, though he knew to be biased, considered it one of the prettiest places he had ever seen. And then, they were standing on a hill, facing the open ocean. "It's beautiful," Ino said. Naruto moved them closer. From this side of the island, there was nothing but peaceful blue seas, stretching on seemingly forever. "It's the ocean, Naruto." Huh? He wondered. "Yes, it is. I've never been close to it before," she admitted. "Really? I've seen lakes before, but I've mostly been within the Land of Fire's borders, and never too deep south or north." "Ah. I see. Most Konoha ninja won't get this far out, it's true," he said. "The wind feels great, doesn't it?" "Yes." She nodded. "I've seen pictures of the ocean before, but they really don't do it justice. When we travel around, there are plenty of other things to see. The Land of Canyons is a sight, for one. It's very different from Fire, despite being fairly close. There are jungles somewhere to the west, too." "You said when. Ino remarked dryly. "Huh. Not if." "Ah, did I? You sound awfully confident that I'm going to come with you guys, don't you?" He grinned. "Well, I wouldn't want you to miss out on the good parts." In the end, Naruto gave Ino the full tour of the lake island, as well as the main one. "This is incredible," she said, taking in the sight of the small village standing in the middle of the green island. "It's pretty great, isn't it?" He nodded. This area was pretty flat, but this island is normally mountainous, and covered in ravines, or trees. That's because of the humidity here. On top of the sea, there are 3 lakes just on this island. "Aren't you getting devoured by mosquitoes?" Ino asked. "Nah, Karen and I came up with a few seals to keep them away." Ino felt vaguely annoyed, for some reason. "You guys did? I thought you would stop studying Fuinjutsu, since it was mostly Sarutobi-sama forcing you, back then." He laughed. "I might have, but the art is actually pretty fascinating, it turns out. Did you know that originally, the man who came up with the idea of double-layered matrix?" Ino let him ramble on and on about the intricacies of sealing, a fond smile on her face, despite herself. "There's something I don't get, though," Ino said, once they were sitting in one of the main city's 3 restaurants. Naruto turned to look at her, attacking his 3rd bowl of noodles. He had helped Ino eat her own before. "What is it about?" "The reason some people still call me Indra here, too? Habit, I guess. I told you my real name already, don't mind them. Same for the Sama thing, some people are just being overly polite." A kid passed by, grinning at him. Naruto smiled back. She rolled her eyes. "Not this." "Go on, then. You said you started building this village months ago," she said, staring at him. "Uh-huh." He nodded, lifting an eyebrow. "I think we arrived in late June? Early July, at the latest." "That's what I'm saying," Ino said, eyes hard. "It makes no sense. Why would you lie about that?" "Huh. It's been only 2, maybe 3 months." "Yeah, what's your point?" he asked, more and more confused. "Are you trying?" she said, punctuating every word as if she were speaking to somebody particularly slow. "To make me believe that this village was built in less than 90 days. Her frustration was building. "Well, yeah." He frowned. "Why would he?" Ino took a good look at him. She could usually tell when somebody was lying. So either he was a greater liar than most jonin, or he was telling the truth. Naruto continued. "We're not that many people, actually. Somewhere between 100 to 200 or 300. No, maybe closer to 100? I don't know, people are in transit all the time. You'd have to ask Orochimaru, I don't really check the registry. But there are a couple reasons we've been able to do it so quickly, though. I'll show you later. Nothing really makes sense around you." Ino sighed. "That much hasn't changed. We really built it one house at a time. It takes us less than an hour to set something basic up, by now." He laughed. "Then we taught the others, and got more help when people came in and dash." He stood up abruptly, slapping his forehead. Ino stiffened. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes. Yes," he said absent-mindedly. "How could I forget? What are you even talking about?" "The shadow clone technique. A big part of what we did to build this place up was made possible thanks to Karen's abilities, and shadow clones." "Are you talking about Lord Second's technique?" "Yeah. That one. I've been using it for years and it's probably my most versatile technique. I just realized only Orochimaru and I learned it. Karen, in particular, would find it useful, being Uzumaki and all. It's more than time I taught you guys how to use it." He created 2 clones to go find Karen and Sakura, and tell them to meet up in a few hours at the house. "We'll meet with them later this afternoon. In the meantime, I'll show you around, there are a few people I'd love for you to meet." They met up with Shinjiro and Takea during the afternoon. Ino laughed, delighted with their stories of sailing across the world, and worried after they recounted the tale of how they came to the Umi archipelago. Naruto and Sakura hadn't told her much about the trip, the mists, shadows, almost drowning, and a sea dragon. She could almost feel jealous. While they were out having what seemed to be grand adventures, she was stuck with Shikamaru and Koji. Or torturing people. Maybe she could welcome the change of pace, even though being around them seemed to be about twice as dangerous. Naruto ended up telling her a lot more, after they left Takea's home, where he lived alone. The man and Shinjiro were good friends, sure, but they were not about to spend even more time in close quarters than they already did. Tales about old Uzumaki legends, a topic about which Orochimaru had given him some scrolls to read, months ago. Of living in the land of rice, what little he had managed to see from the world. Learning about Orochimaru's more dubious sort of research, and using himself as a guinea pig in some ritualistic mutilation, that he had repeated a couple times, to Ino's horror. In return, she told him about the latest Konoha news. Of the things that were different, and those that stayed the exact same. She could see some fondness in his eyes for the village he was born in. At the same time, it was clear he had no further interest in the place. He was home. She was in a strange in-between. The village of Umi could become a home in time, but the fact was, Ino didn't really have a choice in the matter. Her family was still in Konoha, and most of her friends were, too. Ino knew things could have been way worse. She really enjoyed spending time with them and she was very grateful. Still, for the coming weeks, she would cry herself to sleep on most nights. Karen came back at around 5 in the afternoon from a long day with the local craftsman. Someone had to make sure their ceiling projects were viable, and since Naruto had been busy most of the time, she had slipped into the role herself. They had something they could sell very easily. Seals that required no chakra input, and would work on seemingly forever. They only had a few people working on exporting them, but it turned out to be more than enough. Theirs was the kind of product that would spread by word of mouth, until Raisinjo, the official company name they were working under on the mainland, became a household name. They were already raising the prices they were selling their products at, and people were happily lining up to buy more. The world of business was even stranger than the shinobi world. That's what Karen thought after enough time hunching over sales reports, margins, and costs. It wasn't unpleasant, though. Maybe she could continue doing so a while longer. Especially now that she had a new tool to tinker with. Shadow clones were really great, and Karen now wished she had learned about all the things she could do with them earlier on. Learning the technique had been surprisingly easy, too, and she had picked it up before Sakura did. But Karen knew she likely wouldn't take too long either. Ino didn't count, since she could not really use her hands for precise motions at the time. They spent the rest of the evening lazing on the beach, passing around a bottle of rice wine Sakura had stashed away. Life was good. Naruto entered the bathroom silently. They had solved the issue of setting up running water pretty easily. Using seals to extract moisture from the air was nothing new, and the only real problem was the amounts of chakra it usually took. This was another thing that using natural energy solved. A sealed-off barrel kept refilling with water until it was full, and pipes brought it to the shower head or the faucet. It had the added benefit of making the atmosphere a bit drier, too. There were more things involved in making the system sustainable, but tinkering was not what he had come here for. Ino didn't have her own room, so she and Sakura were sharing for the time being. He assumed both of them were sleeping. "Karen," he called. "There's no need for that." She grinned, cheeks flushed, either from pleasure or alcohol. "I felt you coming." He removed his clothes under her heated gaze, before slipping behind her, his lips trailing down her neck. She moaned, her hands grabbing his hair over her shoulder. His own arms sneaked around her waist, pulling her close against him. Sakura didn't look them in the eye, the morning after. Karen and Naruto shared a look. "Something up?" she asked. "Still mad I got us out of trouble yesterday, while your fancy portals were of no help?" Naruto teased, sitting down next to her. She snorted. "Nah, I don't care about that. You should count yourself lucky I was here to prevent you getting finger-poked straight to your death." "Finger-poked?" Karen asked, missing the point. Sakura grinned. Then she stood up, and put on an indifferent expression. She slipped into a loose she only had a single hand, so she felt it was decent imitation of the gentle fist stance. Naruto caught on, stood up and did the same. He stood there, arms folded, eyes closed. "Fool." Sakura started, voice low. "You can't escape these eyes." "Humph." Naruto let out a disdainful snort. "Against my inborn superiority. There is simply nothing you can do." "Is this supposed to be Sasuke?" Karen hesitated. Sakura let out a cackle. Naruto shot her a betrayed look. "It's Neji." "Of course it's fucking Neji. Can't you tell?" Sakura jabbed him with her fingers. 2 times. 4 times. "Drop dead." She turned away from him. "This is the power of the Harano clan." Naruto fell to the floor. "Oh no. My chakra points are all clogged." He mimed spasming. "Humph." As expected from a commoner. Sakura muttered. Karen laughed. That's very funny and all. But why did you look so sour before? Ah. Sakura blushed. That. Naruto nodded from his position on the floor. You remember when you told us you soundproofed the rooms? Sakura asked, not looking at either of them. Ah. He had a feeling he knew. Whether he felt embarrassed or amused, he wasn't sure. Yes. Karen asked. You, kinda forgot to do the shower. Chapter 54, The Calm Before the Storm. The atmosphere at breakfast was strange. Karen was acting normal, if a bit amused. Sakura was acting too cheerful, and Ino was glaring at him. Actually, that was probably why Sakura was doing it in the first place. So yeah, I imagine he wasn't too pleased to learn what this meant about him. Sakura finished her story. Naruto laughed. It was pretty funny, admittedly. Now. Ino, though, didn't seem to react. Ino nodded, never taking her stern eyes off of him. Ino. If you have something to say to me, please do so. Naruto said, bringing the cup of tea to his mouth. I have nothing to say to you. She grunted. All right, then. She definitely was pissed about something, but he really wasn't feeling like playing this game right now. She'd speak when she felt like it. Probably. Karen looked at him as though he were stupid. He frowned at her. Naruto could almost read her face. He knew she could do the same. Do something about this. She seemed to say. How is this my fault? He tried to convey. Isn't this obvious? She rolled her eyes. So, any plans for today? Karen tried. I can't walk. Ino said flatly. Have to train. Naruto said. Need to plan. Sakura declared. Karen sighed. This was going to be a pleasant morning. Of course, that's the moment Orochimaru decided to drop by, Anko in tow. So Akatsuki knows, then. Anko summed up. I don't know how, but yeah. Naruto nodded. They called me Indra, though, so dash. Does it matter? Orochimaru interrupted. Nagato and some of the others know who you are exactly. I'm not sure why they didn't bother informing every member, but that's secondary. They have the Byakugan, too. Anko nodded. I was right in picking this place. Karen lifted an eyebrow. Oh. She was mildly annoyed, this much was obvious. Did you forget how we came here in the first place? Of course, not, but without my precious guidance. Anko waved off. You just pointed an empty spot on a map. Karen retorted hotly. Don't let her rile you up, Karen. Sakura said. Yeah, don't let her rile you up. Karen. Ino repeated. Karen glared at both of them instead. Orochimaru sighed. I'm not sure what Akatsuki was doing so close to Mist, but what matters is that they are active again. This is the first time I've heard of them moving in the open in a while. Mamakai Zabuza and Hyaganiji, then. Yes. Naruto nodded. Which means we now know a few of their members. I'm just going to assume that they didn't switch any of them out in the last few years. He counted off. Uzumaki Nagato. The masked Uchiha Tobi, they called him. Uzumaki Ryujin. Mamakai Zabuza. Hyaganiji. Rumor has it that Hoshigaki Kisame could be one of them. Since Nagato, who is the current leader of Rain, is involved, then his right hand, Konan, probably is as well. Orochimaru added. Anko nodded. Whatever they were doing near Mist, they dropped it to come after you. Which likely means they are ready to hunt Biju. Or that they will continue to hunt you, at least. We don't know how many members there are, but it's safe to say they've been recruiting over the years, with Rain becoming about as strong as one of the 5 great villages. Sakura said. Which was something the Great Five probably would have loved to do something about, if the situation hadn't been so tense between them. And there's war at the corner, of course. Karen concluded. Which will likely be their best chance of poaching Jinchuriki out in the open, and blaming other countries for it. There's something strange, though. Assuming this Tobi guy can simply teleport in and out of a village. Why didn't he do so? Naruto wondered. They could have been waiting for something. Sakura said. What something was unclear. Maybe he couldn't pass the barriers. Anko shrugged. It could be that the Jinchuriki were hidden away. Sakura asked. I don't know how Kumo, Iwa and Kiri do it. Naruto said. But Fu and Gaara were doing their own thing, most of the time. Sasuke, too. Ino interjected. Then again, his missions are highly confidential, and he's either with Konoha or with Jiraiya-sama most of the time, so. Not the easiest target. She amended. Orochimaru was thinking. If Akatsuki is moving openly. He started. Now's our best time to take them out, one by one. While they're split. Naruto finished. Orochimaru raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Yes. This is the gist of what I was about to say. He accepted. For this, I would suggest all of you dash. Wait. Ino shouted. What is it? Naruto wondered. What the hell are you guys involved into? She continued. Take them out? You want to get rid of Akatsuki? Yes. Yeah. Fuck them. Sure. Orochimaru nodded in conclusion. Quite simply. Is this a bad joke? Ino looked at their faces. Sakura looked indifferent. Karin, resolute. Naruto was calm. Orochimaru and Anko were amused. Nagato, and Akatsuki by proxy. Naruto began. They are after at least 3 of us. And Konoha wants most of us dead, too. As far as I'm concerned, this is a preemptive strike. He then frowned, his tone turning cold. I thought a lot about this. He said. I would prefer not to kill. But if it comes to it, if it's a choice between our lives and theirs, I won't hesitate, you have my promise. Nobody seemed fully surprised, she had seen him butcher a dozen elite shinobi herself, but Ino felt a pang of sadness at seeing what felt like the last of his idealism crumble away. Ino put her face in her palms. What did I get myself into? She groaned. Sakura looked sympathetic. Ino. You don't have to get involved. Stay here, as long as you want, and hopefully, when this blows over dash. Like hell. Ino shot back. What? Orochimaru and Naruto shared a look. That had probably been the exact thing to say to push Ino in the other direction. The Snake Sage nodded in pride. They really turned out to be pretty good at manipulating people, despite their very vocal protests about it. Naruto likely knew what he was thinking, because he glared at him. I want in. Ino confirmed. She saw Naruto's face and shot him a dark look. It's not because of what Sakura just said. He said politely. I'm not going to stand by while all of you do your best to get rid of a criminal organization. Ino. I think we're also criminals, technically. Naruto added helpfully. She waved it off. Exactly. It's not like I can get back to Konoha, anyway. I guess that's one way to see it. Naruto looked somewhat worried, and so did Sakura. Was this because they doubted her? Right. Her injuries. Hopefully this wouldn't take too long. Same thing went for the trauma, or course, but what sort of shinobi didn't have their own baggage? A new one. So it's settled. As soon as I recover, I'm joining you guys. She nodded, proud of her decision. This sure beat missions with Shikamaru and Koji. Very well. Orochimaru smiled. As of today, you're a full citizen, shinobi of UMI. Stand proud. Welcome aboard, fellow criminal. Anko grinned. They would go as separate teams, once Ino got settled. Orochimaru would go with Anko. Naruto, Karin, Sakura, and Ino would band together. There apparently were 2 other teams of 5 people each, but Ino was not familiar with any of the people composing them. A war was brewing, but it would likely be weeks, or even months before people would call it so. In the meantime, they would have plenty of things to do. Find information about Akatsuki's plans, finish setting marks all around the world. Building real defenses around the archipelago was urgent too. They were already starting to make enemies, and even though they had a Yamanaka around now, just relying on cursory mind reading was too risky. There was only one of her. Intent-based barriers would work better. And of course, they needed to recruit more people. A total of less than 30 ninja was really cutting it short. It was less than 10, when you only counted the ones that could actually survive in a 5 against Akatsuki. But more than this, it was likely going to be the last time Orochimaru and Anko could afford to train all 4 of them directly, for a while. They would take the next month to prepare. UMI's day-to-day operations needed to be delegated to other people entirely. Not that it would stop Orochimaru from leaving a clone around, when he could afford to. He was too careful not to. So they would cram in as much last-minute practice as they could. So yeah, that's why making a clone more durable drained much more chakra, meaning you could only maintain it for a shorter period. On top of that, if you made clones that were really durable, nearly as much as a real person, they tended to become more unstable, prone to bursting on their own after a period. That's why I tend to aim for a compromise, or no more durability than 2-3 good hits. As long as they have enough chakra to sustain them, they seem to last. I didn't find a limit yet, Naruto explained. He, Sakura and Karen were experimenting. A few copies of Karen stood on the water, next to them. Sakura still couldn't get the jutsu to work, for the moment. So, as long as clones can find a source of chakra, they can last forever. Karen asked, unsure if she got it right. Yeah. I'd say so. Or at least a really long time, but no clone ever showed signs of getting closer to bursting. And all you'd need is chakra. She asked again. Any source? Naruto blinked. You mean making clones rely on natural energy? He asked. She shrugged. It could be an idea, at least. I don't know if there are drawbacks. Doesn't Orochimaru's seal the base for the relay mark work on the same principle anyway? Converting natural energy to usable chakra. Sakura wondered. So in theory, we should already be able to do it, you mean? Karen realized. I think so, yeah. It only stores a small amount, I guess to prevent people from... What did he say could happen? Turning to stone. Yeah, something like it. Naruto said. That's what Kakashi had said too. So if we learn how to draw directly from the seal, our clones should be able to do the same, right? Karen asked again, for confirmation. Which would mean they'd be able to sustain themselves for longer. Well, let's find out, then. They'd have to tell Ino, too. This, she could get a head start on. What do you mean? You can use other elements than your main affinities. Naruto asked Sakura, confused. She blinked. Well, it is way harder and costs more chakra, but in theory, with enough time, you can learn how to use them. My affinity is water, with a weaker one for earth. Look. To prove her point, she focused for a while, and spat out a small tongue of fire, that likely wouldn't even be enough to light a fire. Naruto looked on, confused. Did Sarutobi not teach you that? He frowned. Well. I mean, he can use all 5, and so did Orochimaru, but I assumed they just had an affinity for all of them. But nobody has an affinity for 5, that would defeat the purpose. I mean, I could gather some water chakra as a kid, but I can't anymore. I assumed this was part of growing up. Wait, so you mean to tell me you could use water before? She asked and he nodded. But you can't anymore. Yup, that's it. I never really learned water jutsu, though. Seems as though I can't do it at all, right now. Only wind and lightning. Sakura frowned. You know, that's not normal at all. It's not supposed to happen, ever. Can you teach me how to use natural energy? Naruto asked Orochimaru. I could teach you how to use Sage Mode, yes. He said, looking straight at him. But you would have to sign the snake summoning contract. I'm bound not to, otherwise. And Orochimaru really wasn't too fond of this part of the contract. He valued his freedom too much for that. Naruto winced. That was what he had feared. I don't trust Manda, or his underlings. I understand that quite well. Orochimaru said dryly. There was a reason he himself only summoned him during wartime. That's not it. They won't teach you the secrets of Sage Mode just like that. It took me years and years until I had their trust. It would be the same for you. Naruto sighed. Unfortunately, learning from Konoha's greatest summons is the only way I know to use natural energy in that way. There was Yugo's clan, of course, but you won't be able to use it like them, since it's a bloodline ability. The jutsu formula I am aware you call everything a seal we created, for people to use the relay, is the closest you will get to learning from their ways. Ah, well. Good to know, I guess, thanks. He was about to leave, when he remembered what they had discussed with Karen and Sakura earlier. I got some other idea to run by you, actually. Do tell your old sensei. I didn't know how to ask you earlier on, but... Did you manage to get the scrolls Sarutobi gave you out of Konoha? Naruto asked Ino, once only the two of them were awake. She snorted. And here I thought I could just have a nice relaxing evening. He winced. Sorry, but I have to ask. Ino sighed. Relax, I'm joking. I do have them. Naruto felt some tension he had not even been aware of leave him. Ah, that's good. Thank you again and dash. Please, don't give me any more apologies or I'm going to feel like hitting you. Alright, forget I was about to say anything. Faster. Karen panted, almost at the end of her rope. Faster. So close. She was so close. Faster. Gah. Karen grunted, falling to her knees in exhaustion. Her chains hadn't managed to catch Sakura once. They dispelled, with a rattling sound. She dragged herself to a sitting position, above the water. Huh. And here I thought your stamina was almost infinite. Sakura laughed, sitting down next to her. I would like to see you try. Karen panted. These chains took a lot of chakra to maintain. I'd love to, but that's not really up my alley. Sakura shrugged. I wouldn't mind learning this earth spike technique from the other day, though. Ah? This old thing? Sure thing. Let me recover some, first. They were working on Karen's speed, in every way they could think of. She didn't have Naruto's lighting or wind affinity, both suited to enhancing speed, nor Sakura's incredible chakra control, that allowed her to do the same. Which left her in an awkward spot, relying mostly on shorter bursts of speed, like the body flicker. It would have been enough for most people. Unfortunately, they were going to face monsters among monsters, so she couldn't afford to leave it at that. All right. She stood up. Let's go again. I was hoping you'd say that. Sakura grinned. Slowly, slowly. Naruto said, his hand on Ino's back. He had been with her more than she had ever expected him to be, even if it had been a clone at times. He and Karen had helped Orochimaru with healing her, doing whatever they could. Yeah. She muttered, focused on her first step. Ino felt a bit unstable on her own feet, and not just because of the cast, but she could manage. A second step followed. Then a third. She turned around with a grin, just in time to see Naruto wipe a tear away. Are you crying? Ino asked. No. Liar, you so are. Ino smiled. Did he care that much? She felt something. He sniffled, looking away. Nah. Not crying. You are, though. Naruto said, pointing at her face. She realized he was right. They shared a dumb look, before starting to laugh. You can walk again. He exclaimed, pulling her into his arms. Careful, you big lunk. She laughed, more tears rolling down her face. So, are you going to be living with us? Karen asked Ino, one evening. Ino's recovery was going well, and she was able to start practicing again, albeit lightly. Does that bother you? The Yamanaka asked in return. No, far from it. Karen tried to appease her. Considering the circumstances, she could understand Ino might feel a bit frustrated, so she gave her a bit more leeway than she would with anyone else. Just to know if we should expand the house, or at least the rooms. Does it really matter? You sleep with Naruto on most nights, anyway. Then realizing how petulant she sounded. Sorry, didn't mean it like that. She sighed. Karen laughed. No offense taken. It's true, too. I'll stay with him, then. You can take my room, I don't have much in it. Maybe that had been the wrong thing to say. Ino didn't look much happier. There was no denying it, at this point. He had tried to distract himself through training and studying the scrolls Ino had given him, and the material the fourth had been working on with was incredible, the kind that would keep Orochimaru and him busy for a while. It was not enough. He couldn't ignore the truth. The rituals had definitely changed Naruto. It wasn't just something as straightforward as he had thought it was. The increased sex drive was somewhat problematic at times, but he could manage. Enjoyment during battle could be useful, even, at times. No, that was not the problem. He had dabbled in the realm of gods. More and more, he was realizing that what he had thought to be cute Uzumaki folklore, might turn out to be very, very real. At night, he could almost feel the pull of the moon. And not just the physical one, that he could see in the sky, either. It felt as though the night itself was calling to him, bolstering his desires and caressing his soul. It was a cold presence, one he was getting more and more comfortable with. It was not the only one either, as both Fujin carvings called out to him, bringing with them the sound of the wind, more and more often. The two Raijin were the same, and the crack of thunder was something he heard even when the world stood silent. And since more recently, Susanoo no Mikoto had kept the others' call at bay. Somewhere where their intensity was not any lesser, but more, controlled. But its allure might well be the strongest of them all. It reminded him of Indra, if he had to compare it to something else. There at all times, in a way that permeated everything. As though it were already part of him, or him part of it. He saw, heard, smelled, and felt the purple storms even in his dreams. And the most worrying part? Naruto wasn't sure what it would do to him in the future. How he would continue to change. And worse, he had never felt a rush like that. Even now, he still felt the desire to complete another set of carvings. Happy birthday, Ino. 3 grinning people greeted her when she came back from her first walk alone. Ino must have looked terribly surprised, because Naruto turned skeptical. What, did you think we'd forget? Naruto laughed. Well. Actually, she had. Unless we're not the 23rd of September. Naruto asked, now wondering. He didn't really keep track of time. No. We are. She said with a fond smile. Thanks, guys. Actually, we got you a few gifts, since we all missed a few of your birthdays. Sakura said. You? Really? Ino's voice sounded pretty small, even to herself. You didn't have to dash. Nonsense. Naruto cut through, smiling. Karen offered her an iron hairband shaped like a flower. There was a permanent seal or Jutsushiki. Naruto and Orochimaru debated a lot on the topic, so she still wasn't clear on that was designed to keep her long hair in place, and out of her face. Thank you. Ino said, genuinely moved. She was ashamed to say that even now, she felt envy toward Karen. The feeling was there, even though she cared for the Uzumaki a lot. Ah, don't sweat it. She grinned. I tested it out before, and it should work just fine. Might sell some of them at some point, even. You mean, you made this? Ino asked, baffled. Yup. Okay, she was definitively envious of her skills as well, now. Sakura gave her battle armor. Ino asked. Sakura nodded. It's stylish and easy to wear. That's what I wear most days. Ino almost laughed. What had happened to the girly girl she remembered from childhood? Nevertheless, it was of great quality, and she would definitely want some kind of protection in the coming days. Thank you, Sakura. You're welcome. Naruto handed her some fabric that was, somewhere between dark and translucent. Ino blinked. What was that? This is something I completed yesterday. It cost me a fair amount of sleep, so I hope it's useful. I've never seen anything like this. What? I call it my cloak of Thun dash. Don't. Sakura warned. Naruto grumbled. It's a chakra-conductive cloak. Try using it as a focus for your genjutsu, it should respond to you only. Now that she had it in her hands, she noticed how easily her chakra flowed through it. She weaved a few hand signs, pictured the cloak becoming mirror-like, and to her surprise, it shifted to something eerily similar to what she had pictured. Naruto continued. I managed to work in the same principles as chakra-conductive metal. It's pretty durable too. Of course, we won't start selling this, because I'm kinda worried about what kind of horrors the villages would start making with them. I also can't really use it like you do, because I'm terrible at genjutsu, this is just a focus. It works with ambient energy, so don't worry about chakra consumption. It switches to using your chakra if the natural energy runs empty, too. Casting an illusion to make it look like something else should work, in theory. Or changing colors. Now that I think of it, I could make something similar for us. If I just made a cloak designed to change colors by writing a seal for dash. Okay. She interrupted his sealing babble. Thank you, Naruto. I love it already. She fit the cloak around herself, and felt it turn purple. It fit her right away, and it was clearly high quality. To be honest, she felt like kissing him. Platonically, of course. I'm glad, then. He smiled. He seemed to think for a second, and continued, something glinting in his eyes. There's another reason I got you this, Ino. Naruto stared at her. Despite herself, she felt her traitorous heart skip a beat. Oh yeah? She asked, cheeks a bit red. He nodded. Otherwise, people from the mainland would think we're flat broken UMI. Since you kept running around in bandages. It would make recruiting harder than it is already, as criminals. Naruto laughed. Naruto. The rest of the month passed quickly, spent training, researching and talking. Lots of new ideas were thrown around, some workable, some not so much. A few days after Naruto's own 19th birthday, Ino had recovered fully. They were ready to go. All four of them came out of their house wearing similar seal-enhanced outfits. All right. Naruto smiled, pushing his own worries away. Time to head out. To the world. They disappeared in a crack of thunder. Chapter 55, Long Live Konoha. It didn't happen right away. Both Danzo, 6th Hokage, and Raza, 4th Kazekage, had seen the writing on the wall, though. Skirmishes along the border at first. Reports of shinobi from either village disappearing in the other's land. And then, the same thing happened to the Kazekage's daughter, on neutral ground, where Konoha troops had been sighted. The Hokage refuted the allegations. Old tensions, such as Suna accusing Konoha of poaching their only Biju, decades after Taki had gotten their hands on the Seven Tails, had been brewing for a while, too. Add to that the fact that Konoha had also gone back to their standard practice of poaching missions from Wind, missions that would normally go to Suna. When the Kazekage called back most of his troops to Suna, no one was truly surprised. The man was getting increasingly paranoid. Rumor in the Land of Wind had it that Konoha was planning to deal a crushing blow to Suna. As a last try, if you could call it that, the Kazekage extended a proposal for new trade rules to Konoha, which would prove their good faith. They were harsh terms, to no one's surprise. Shimura Danzo refused. As far as Suna was concerned, this was when the war started. Sarutobi Biwako watched, as the village of Konoha prepared for war, once more. There were many more shinobi within the village than usual. 3 times the usual number at the gates, and that was just when counting the ones that stood in plain sight. When Muramaru, her firstborn, had died along with his wife on a mission to the land of Earth that had gone wrong. She had wanted to blame Fugaku for leaving young Kano Amaru an orphan. It had been his decision to send them on a mission that he knew they had a low chance of coming back from. They had been Umbu, of course, and Biwako knew better than most how risky the position was. In time, she had come to accept that Hiruzen would have taken the same decision. This was just the kind of sacrifice that came with being Hokage. Even then, she still wondered if there had not been another alternative. And this was how she felt about Danzo's decision to bring them to war with Suna. Sure, he didn't declare war openly, not at first, but he knew better than anyone what would happen if he kept on driving Suna into a corner. Some part of her, the part that remembered growing with Danzo, that had seen Hiruzen's best friend change after their sensei died, after years and years of bloody war and shady operations and self-imposed isolation. Well, that part of her wondered if this had been his intention all along. And whether or not he was responsible for the disappearance of young Temari of the desert. He was the type of man to see enemies in every shadow, and would only feel justified in striking first at a perceived enemy. She stood on top of the Hokage tower with Hiruzen, close to a pale-faced Uchiha Mikoto. The counselors were right next to them as well, followed by the clan leaders, including the newly instated Uchiha clan head, Itachi. Danzo stood in front of all of them, overlooking the crowd, in his formal Hokage robes. The village was silent. Most people knew what was coming. Biwako herself could remember standing amidst a similar crowd, half a century ago, anxiously waiting for Lord Second to speak. She remembered watching Senjuto Bairama's own council, the war-hungry clan heads that had seemed so far away from the village's citizens, back then. And now, she was on the other side. Looking through the crowd, she knew that there were young ninja thinking exactly the same thing she had been thinking, 50 years ago. They would blame them for it. And maybe they would be right. She closed her eyes. Danzo spoke. Citizens of Konoha. He started his address. Weeks ago. On September 6th, a day which will be remembered, Konoha was suddenly and viciously targeted by those we once thought to be our allies. Suna. Biwako frowned. The poison had been a Suna secret, but that was all they could confirm. Hiruzen closed his eyes, next to her. He knew Danzo too well. Something strange was going on, and even though she knew that everything incriminated her, Biwako could not believe that Yamanaka Ino was responsible. Neither could Hiruzen, of course. It didn't matter how many times Danzo insisted she had been radicalized by agents working in coalition with Suna, including the man from UMI Naruto. Another person she really couldn't not afford to think about right now, when she was supposed to help show a united front. It didn't matter that Hiruzen was clearly hiding something from her, something that was related to Ino's disappearance. He had said that it was safer for her, this way. Which meant they were playing a dangerous game. And it was not just because Inoichi had been her student, along with Shikaku and Choza. Not just because of her carefully hidden fondness for his daughter. Not just because she knew she wouldn't have done it. Rather, because she knew Ino would not have been caught. The Land of Fire was at peace with Suna's nation, Wind, and up until recently, we were still in conversation with Suna's council and their cage, as Jiraiya here can attest. A stone-faced Jiraiya stood somewhere next to Danzo. He said nothing. She could not help but notice how lonely he seemed, standing here without either of his teammates, her husband's sole dedicated student. Suna forces are responsible for poisoning Uchiha Fugaku, our fifth Hokage. Danzo said, over the murmuring crowd. This attack came after a long period of diplomatic negotiations, where no hint of war or armed attack had been made. It is a cowardly act. The crowd started to become more agitated. Angry, too. That was where Danzo wanted them. It is now obvious to us that the attack was deliberately planned. The poison has been brought in by foreign agents, and administered by one of our own. A traitor. Louder and louder. The attack on the Hokage is an attack on Konoha as a whole. It has caused severe damage to us, as a village. I regret to tell you that this was just a start. Suna will not stop here. Already, they are pushing for more, accusing the entirety of Konoha of terrible acts, and stealing our resources, and what is rightfully ours. And if this were not enough, they have recently started to murder our very own citizens. Our protectors. Our shinobi. Suna has undertaken a surprise, cowardly offensive on us. The facts speak for themselves. Most of our people, the people of Konoha, have already understood the implications for the safety and the well-being of our nation. I know you all do. Danzo let the crowd roar. He smiled at them benevolently. I am Shimura Danzo, your 6th Hokage. They started to cheer. I will not let this offense go unpunished. Konoha's youth was burning. Theirs was the desire to fight the injustice that had been done, to avenge their fallen leader, and it was stoked by the fires of imagined heroism and glory. The older generation, of course, was more subdued. But even they did not object, or show fear for what was to come. Our whole nation will always remember the nature of the attack against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome the enemy, the people of Konoha will hold on. As we have always done. A bright flame lit up above the Hokage Tower. To war we go. Danzo shouted, seemingly overcome by emotion. Biwako knew better. The crowd chanted back. To war. Long live Konoha. Long live Konoha. Chapter 56, Down the Rift. The rising sun started to lift the fog. His Sharingan had allowed him to see through it before, but now the rest of his troops could see the target as well. A flat rocky expanse. And further down in the rift, the city of Kin, home to some of the Land of Wind's biggest gold mines. Heitake Kakashi was, to many people, the pinnacle of shinobi. Strong, clever, and loyal to a fault. There were times such as these though, where he wondered about his actions. Morals, good and evil, were things that shinobi had to contend with, almost on a daily basis. But this brought back some of his worst memories. Narashakao appeared next to him. Kakashi nodded at him. He nodded back. Shinobi leaped down the face of the cliff, sliding down it as fast as they could afford to. Wind blades came at them from down the rift, courtesy of the shinobi guarding the village. Arrows flew at them, too, propelled by large siege crossbows. The wave of ninja coming down the cliffs were just a distraction, most of them simple illusions woven by their 5 genjutsu masters. As for the ones that weren't illusions, 4 Akimichi expanded in size, before rolling down the hill, picking up more and more speed and power and fury. They were not as good with body expansion as Chozo was, few were, really, but they had something else, that was more suited for this sort of situation. Flaming arrows flew, aimed at them. A shell made of earth hardened around the Akimichi, making them almost impervious to damage. Earth release, rolling death. He heard Akimichi Kojiro shout, his voice carrying through the ravine. The 4 boulders of death slammed into the village's walls, breaking them open, and crushing down a few houses at the same time. There really were no winners in war, and civilians paid a heavy price all too often. As Kakashi sank into the floor of the cliff, moving through the earth, part of the second wave of attack, he reminded himself that this was the cost of peace. He could almost believe it. Inyazuka Kiba growled as he tore through Asuna Kunoichi's throat with his claws. The woman died painfully, choking on her own blood. Kiba spat out a piece of flesh with a wince. Akamaru! He called. The hound answered his call, and rushed to come to his side. Akamaru barked something. To the east, you say? Kiba managed to grunt out, having some trouble speaking clearly with his now elongated fangs. While they ran, howling, they made sure to tear the siege weapons apart. The men operating them, many of them non-shinobi, ran away screaming. Konoha! Konoha! Most of them, Kiba let go. There was no real point in killing them, after all. He enjoyed the rush of battle, the feeling of dominating another trained shinobi, not massacring people who could not even fight back. He wanted to make the Suna bastards pay. He would. The ground opened under him, and only him. He saw Akamaru's dumb expression and suddenly he was falling. No. Oh hell no. A hand caught him before he fell on the spikes he could see gleaming. Kakashi pulled him up. Careful there. The man I smiled. Sorry. Got carried away. I'd assumed so. Kakashi said dryly. I think Shinzo is not in the city anymore. If he ever was. What? Kiba asked, dumbstruck. This was the leader of the shinobi forces stationed in Kin that they had come here to assassinate. He was one of Suna's strongest jonin. But I can still smell dash. We were led to a trap. Kakashi's voice cut him off. But dash. There were less shinobi than usual, and it was mostly civilians operating the siege weapons. Kakashi sighed. They had expected us, and set a few traps to thin our numbers out. Kiba took a look around, and realized the man might well be right. After a mere hour, it seemed as though the fighting had stopped already. That didn't happen. Not for a city as important as Kin was to the Land of Wind as a whole. And Kiba could see something moving on top of the cliffs. People. People wearing Suna's colors, it seemed. Hayagakeo, his former sensei, confirmed. Ah. Fuck. He cursed. They were trapped down the rift, and Suna had encircled them. Kiba could hardly believe they were ready to sacrifice an entire city just for a chance to kill one of Konoha's striking forces. Unless they had somehow known Hatake Kakashi would be among them. Then Kiba would not be entirely surprised. There were only a few S-rank shinobi in Konoha, and here was one who had already experienced war, and that had a list of achievements so long it seemed as though it had been made up. I sent a signal to Jiraiya-sama. Kakashi said. Let us hope it will be fast enough. Projectiles started hailing on them. Kiba, follow my lead. Kakashi weaved 7 hand seals, settling on Snake. Earth style, Earth Dome. A half-sphere of compacted dirt rose from the ground around them. Kiba followed, and a second layer appeared around it. They hastily raised some more earth walls around the city center to defend their precarious position. Soon a ninja started coming down the cliff, as fast as they could. How ironic. Aki stood near the edge of the cliff with Midori, his second in command, close to some Konoha shinobi's corpses. How many men left? He asked her. She put her left hand up, the other held in a half-bird sign. The wind carried back, along with the information. This was the specialty of the Shiba clan, one of Suna's most noble. It is a strike force of 22 ninja. Among them, 16 are men, and 5 are women. I think there might be a wolf, or a hound, as well. Thank you, Midori. Aki nodded. Is Hatake Kakashi with them? I would say he is. The man's chakra feels like lightning, touched with something else, that feels like fire and illusions. That's him, no doubt. Thank you, Midori. Take some rest, please. I can go on. Please. He shook his head. We're gonna need you later. Please, you've done more than enough. He smiled. Let us take care of the rest. Yes, sir. She smiled sadly. He had always worried too much about his troops. They had around 100 men. Around 50 up. Around 50 down. Most were Chunin, but many were competent Jonin. He knew of the copy ninja, of course, but this would be enough, he was confident. Calm down, Kiseki. Aki said to a young man, who seemed to be all too eager to join the fray. Show some patience. They're not going anywhere. You're right, Aki-sama. I'm sorry. Relax. Aki laughed easily. See. He pointed at the catapults. If we had rushed in, they wouldn't have gotten rid of them for us. Yes, I see it now. Kiseki nodded. Cornered rats are at their most dangerous. And what a rat we have gotten ourselves here. This isn't too bad, as far as wounds go. Kakashi said. It is deep, sure, but better a deep and clean wound than a torn and shallow one. He called fire chakra to his fingertips, cauterizing the younger ninja's wound, who held back a grunt. There. He patted his arm, and sat down again. Kakashi was in a tight spot. Several of his men were dead already, and none of those remaining were ready for an extended battle. He could see citizens from Kin trying to escape the city, trapped by the Suna ninja, just like they were. Suna wasn't taking any chances, too afraid of any Konoha ninja escaping by disguising themselves as some of them, he thought. Still, Suna was taking extra precaution to avoid injuring or killing the civilians. Good on them. For a moment, he considered taking hostages, then discarded the idea. He knew Suna would not hesitate to get rid of a few civilians if it meant getting rid of him. Because it was getting clearer and clearer that they had expected someone not necessarily him important to be leading Konoha's strike force. He sighed, calling for someone to reinforce the southern part of the earth wall. Before they could do that, the eastern wall fell entirely, struck down by a powerful lightning attack. Kakashi got to his feet, ignoring the worried shinobi, and opened his Sharingan eye. Chakra rippled through the dusty air like waves. Over time, he had learned not to get too distracted by the sudden overload of information the eye brought. It wouldn't do to get distracted in battle because he had focused on counting each individual droplet of water he could see forming whenever anyone used a water jutsu. Kojiro! He shouted. The earth rumbled as the Akimichi rolled through the now open dome. He struck the first wave of Suna ninja waiting outside of it head-on. Kakashi weaved hand seals. Earth-style, stalagmite. A pillar of stone appeared right under the rolling Kojiro, launching him into the air. When he fell back to the ground, it felt as though the entire rift shook. Kakashi channeled lightning. He channeled earth. He used both at the same time, without being able to combine them. He didn't need to. With the Sharingan's help, he weaved one jutsu on autopilot, freeing him to weave another with his other hand. He had never seen any Uchiha do the same thing, and it was something he had only managed very, very recently. Earth-style, deep well. Lightning-style, spark bite. He released both jutsu at the same time, creating a medium-sized hole in the ground to his left, and a sphere of moving electricity to his right, leaving only a straight path in, or out the open dome. Controlling the terrain was key. He heard screams of pain. If Suna thought they would wait for death patiently, they had a few surprises coming. Now, it wouldn't do to leave Chosa's nephew alone in the midst of an army. Behind him, his fellow Konoha ninja started weaving fire jutsu. There were plenty of techniques he knew he could use, but only one that would really be helpful in this specific situation. Kakashi then channeled lightning chakra throughout his entire body. The lightning cloak rose to life around him. He disappeared. The Sharingan really shone here. His surroundings stood out clearly to him, even though he was moving at speeds he was almost certain the human body was not really meant for. How did Minato-sensei pull it off? His tanto caught a Suna ninja in the back of the neck, cutting through flesh and bone as though it were butter. Behind him, he knew his team was coming out of the half-dome, weapons drawn. The Suna ninja dropped dead. That's one. Hatake has been sighted. The messenger brought the news back to Aki. Good. Let's go with the second phase of the plan, then. Aki closed his eyes, mourning the soldiers that had needed to die for Hatake to reveal himself. The trick to cornering somebody was to let them have the illusion of a way out. Otherwise, they would fight like they never did before. Hatake would fight to the death, there was no doubt about it. And even against 100 men. It was better not to leave anything to chance. The man was S rank for a reason. Luckily, he had one glaring weakness they could exploit. That's 18. He was managing his stamina decently, but having to also make sure to keep the number of dying shinobi on his side low, was really putting him into a delicate position. Their team had been built for one task. Distracting the shinobi forces guarding the city while he and Orkiba assassinated Shinzo. Then getting away. Taking control of the city would have been another team's job. And fighting in the center of it, defending from enemies who had the high ground had definitely not been in the plan. Because this was not what most of his team was suited for, far from it. Another hail of arrows fell on them again, and he had to push a kunoichi out of their way. By now, he was pretty sure that their genjutsu users, that had remained on the cliffs, had been killed already. There were 20 enemy archers above, he counted. And he recognized the man leading the Suna troops. Tall, with pale skin and auburn hair. Aki, the Iron Sun. A sarcastic nickname for a distant relative of Suna's third Kazekage, who had shown a weak affinity for the iron sand technique. Despite that, or because of it, he had still managed to become a competent general, who had suffered few losses. The man focused his chakra, enhancing his voice. The entire city is rigged with explosives. Stop now, Hatake, and let us avoid senseless massacre. Kakashi squinted. This could be a bluff. Aki motioned for something with his hand. Down the rift, the enemy ninja halted their assault, stepping back carefully. Then several of them pulled off their flak jackets, revealing explosive tags. They're linked together. One of the Suna ninja said, pulling a dead man's jacket down, revealing the exact same thing. There are more inside the city itself. Way more. The Sherinon showed no lie. The man was telling the truth. Or thought he was, at least it wouldn't be the first time somebody tried that. Kakashi tensed. With this amount of explosives, he feared he had no way of getting everyone out safely. He was maybe fast enough to get away using his lightning cloak at full potential. Maybe his team would be left in the hands of Suna. Dead, or worse. The same thing went for the civilians he could see cowering and crying. They clearly didn't get the memo beforehand. Kakashi sighed. What do you want? He shouted back. Aki smiled. He created a small platform of iron sand, and floated down a bit closer. Not close enough for Kakashi to attack him, but close enough that the blast of the explosion would kill him for sure. All of my men are ready to die. He said simply. And I am, too. So are most shinobi. Kakashi answered tersely. The fighting had stopped entirely. What would be the point, when they all knew one sign was all it took to reduce the entire city to rubble? If you want your men, and the citizens of Kin to live, come with us. You're after the Sherinon, then? Kakashi asked back. Aki shrugged. There's no point in hiding it. This and the secrets your body holds will serve Suna well. Kakashi thought fast. He was not afraid of dying, and had not been for a long time. If it meant saving the hundreds of innocent people that had lived there, as well as his men, he would do it gladly. But this would mean giving away the Sherinon to Suna. How much of a deal that was hard to estimate. Mist had managed to get their hands on a Byakugan, according to rumor. The eye on its own was worth a lot. The Sherinon often deactivated upon death, which made it even harder to get, as Nanuchiha could not make any use of it, as far as Kakashi knew. So when it came to the eye, he was sure that Suna would get a lot of mileage out of it. Its secrets. This was less certain. Konoha had been trying to study both eyes for a while, with only a few useful results. Besides, once he was certain his men were safe, he could still try to destroy Obito's eye. But Suna probably expected that. The truth was, compared to having access to a full-bodied Uchiha or Hyuga clan member, the eye was worth way less. But still, his men's lives were on the line. Somehow, he could not help but think of his father, put in front of an impossible choice. In the end, he knew what he would do before the thought had been fully formed. Obito, Dad. You really rubbed off on me, huh? I accept your terms. He said simply, throwing his tanto down. He heard protests coming from his team. Kakashi gave them an eye smile. Aki came closer. Sorry, guys. It's for the best, really. Kakashi said. Aki sighed. I had hoped you'd say that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Wah. Kakashi turned his lightning cloak on. Only to find himself trapped in a cubic barrier of purple flames with Aki. For ninja he hadn't really any particular attention to, all of them standing in seemingly random positions, held the barrier up. They had been ready to spring it around them as soon as Aki got down, then. I'm sorry for the deception. And I admire your sense of honor. Aki said. We never cared about getting your eye. But I had to get close to you, somehow. Is this how Suna does things? Kakashi spat. Aki smiled sadly. It is the way of shinobi. Kakashi understood that the remaining men had never planned on detonating themselves in the first place. They just had to make him believe they did. Still. You sacrificed more than 20 of your jonin, as well as your own life, to kill a single man? Because, make no mistake. I might die, but I won't let you leave here alive either. I think you know that the trade-off is worth it. That's what I believe, at least. My life, the life of a worthless imitation, for the life of the copy ninja. Aki shrugged, removing his flak jacket. He too was covered in tags. Powerful ones, at that. That's a choice I'd make any day. For Suna. On the cliff, Kiseki and Midori watched on. He put a hand on her shoulder. Don't cry, Midori-sama. This is what he chose. I know. She said, wiping a tear away. It doesn't make it less painful. This is one less enemy for Suna. Kiseki tried to convince himself. There's no reason for us to be sad. She gave him a mirthless smile. Then why are you trembling? He had no answer to give her. The explosion shook the barrier. When the smoke cleared, the Suna ninja cried in horror. Heitake Kakashi was still standing, his clothes in tatters, and his body covered in burn wounds. His hand was extended, and around him, a shield made of several layers of lightning was shining so brightly that it hurt to watch. He was breathing heavily. Silence reigned into the rift. The barrier still stood, but weakened. Heitake would definitely be able to break it, now. And then he'd kill all of them. Forget about the barrier. Someone shouted. Kill Heitake. Kill them all. For Suna. The barrier fell. At the same moment, every single explosive tag in the ravine activated. The resulting explosion forced the remaining Suna forces on top of the cliff to move away. Unbeknownst to them, a small toad had appeared into the ravine with a puff of smoke. Kakashi drifted in and out of consciousness. There was a tall man in front of him, facing away. I'm too late. The man said grimly. I came as soon as I could, but I'm too late. We're the only survivors. The civilians are gone, too. Everybody was dead, then, besides him. Never him. This was the worst failure Kakashi could have suffered. The flames didn't reach the man, parting around him, their heat flowing upwards. Ah. You're here. That's. He passed out. Kakashi. Uchiha Sasuke said, sadly. You really have the shittiest luck. Chapter 57, The Living Flame. It is done. Midori said, breathless. Nobody could have survived that explosion. Not even Heitake. I can't believe they ended up using the tags. They were supposed to dash, Kiseki muttered. This is terrible, so awful. I don't dash. Don't. She said, shivering. Don't go there. War is war. This is all for Suna. People will live here again, in time. And the mines are further away, as well. Our men knew what they signed for. Kiseki repeated, more for himself. It is for the good of Suna. The civilians, on the other hand, did not know anything. And they certainly didn't sign up for this, when they accepted Suna's troops within their walls. Yes. Yes it is. Midori nodded sadly. Still, I can't believe they're all gone. We'll have to blame Konoha, too. The army was waiting for the smoke to recede, so that they could go down the cliff to confirm the kills. Then, Midori stiffened. What is it? Kiseki asked. There's someone else down the cliff. And I felt a similar chakra before. What do you mean? He asked again, starting to get worried. God, I hope I'm wrong. She paled, looking down the cliff, remembering a small, thin, red-headed boy who had become one of her worst fears. Flames were starting to rise high up in the air, way too high to be coming from the wrecked buildings. Oh no. Please no. She whispered. What is it? Kiseki repeated. There was a keening sound, growing louder and louder. That's the One-Tails chakra. And it feels even stronger than it did before. She shouted. He paled. Then that means. It's Uchiha Sasuke. Retreat. Fall back. A pillar of flame exploded upwards. Sito was a war veteran. He had been a jonin for years, decades even, and as such, was among the oldest, most experienced people sent to Kin today. It was hard, coming back from war and trying to adjust to regular shinobi missions. And talking to the younger generation felt as though the divide between them was almost physical. They were on the same side, but they might as well have been born into two different worlds. Aki was young, certainly, but over time, he had come to trust him. Here was a man who understood what it took to bring victory to their home. Heitake was strong, and terrifyingly enough, still growing. At this rate, he would soon eclipse even his father, the White Fang. The man who had torn through Suna like the famine had, generations before. And him alive, there was no way he'd allow that. They had to cut him down. Sito had volunteered to be among the troops that went down, but Aki had refused. They needed someone like him to lead the new generations in case the worst happened, not a youth like him, he had grinned. He probably had known that the possibility they might have to bomb the entire city was high. He had deferred to his commander, of course. There was some truth to the sentiment. Now, as a war veteran, Sito had fought Uchiha before. The thrice-damned clan had stolen several of his precious techniques, of course. And to add salt to the injury, one of them had also given him some raw burns that still felt painful sometimes on his face and right arm. He had taken his revenge when the opportunity had come, and Uchiha Izuru had died, his precious fire techniques doing nothing to save him when cold steel found its way into his lungs. So when it came to fighting Uchiha, Sito was more than ready. Now, there was just one problem here. Despite his name, there was nothing even remotely Uchiha about this man's fighting style. How long had it been? Sito was sweating, and not just from the heat. How long had it been since he had felt the weight of facing a giant? The chakra pressing down on them did not feel human. And it didn't really feel like the One-Tails either, despite what Midori said. The heat was rising, the air turning shimmery around them. Uchiha Sasuke rose from the ravine, standing atop a pillar of flame. In his right hand, he held a sword that was covered by pale fire, almost swallowed by it. His red eyes were glowing, shining an eerie light, which almost seemed to be golden, as well. "Draw your weapons," the Uchiha said. "You said you were ready to die. You wouldn't want to do so without putting up a fight, would you?" "Wind?" Jiraiya asked, lost in thought. "You told me your affinity was fire, didn't you? It's a bit early to go for a second, I'd say." They were in the land of lightning, up in the mountains, where the air was thin. Sasuke's training was going well. Almost too well, actually. It reminded him of teaching Nagato. Not just because both had legendary eyes, though they didn't hurt. But the way they picked up on things, almost instinctively. Minato had been the same way, too. For a man that prided himself on training underdogs, he really got a lot of prodigies, didn't he? "It is," Sasuke said, simply. "But no, let me show you." Sasuke's eyes turned red, just as his chakra turned even more corrosive. Beige chakra rose in wisps around him. He held his hand in front of him, face screwed in concentration. There was a high-pitched, screechy sound. The wind howled, forming a miniature tornado around his hand. "Oh?" Jiraiya asked. "So you can use some of the One-Tails abilities, after all?" Sasuke had shown almost no ability to use the sand itself, which had frustrated him some. He had resorted to using the Biju as a power source, which was working out decently well. He grunted in answer. "Wait. There's more, then." Sasuke's eyes strained, reaching their Mangekyo form. Then Sasuke channeled fire chakra into his hand. The very air seemed to set itself on fire, a whitish flame covering his hand up to his elbow. "Say so dash. It won't hurt me. Not with my eyes." Sasuke gritted out, sweat pouring down his brow. Jiraiya could feel the intensity of the flame. The Biju's chakra lent itself to wind naturally. And it seemed this wind in particular fed the flames extremely well. Sasuke dispelled the flames, and once it was done, his Sharingan as well. He gasped for air. Blood was coming from both of his eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" Jiraiya asked, reaching for him. I'm fine. The One-Tails chakra heals me, and my eyes anyway." He grunted out. "What was that?" "That," Sasuke said, still panting, "is the reason I'm asking if you can teach me how to channel wind chakra safely." Sasuke flew toward the enemy, a ball of compressed flame. He landed in their midst in an explosion, flames licking the earth. Kakashi was safe. On the other hand, every other Konoha shinobi was dead. That included Kiba, one of Hinata's best friends, and someone Sasuke had grown to care about, despite their wildly different personalities. That included Ko, her former sensei. And it meant that Sasuke would have to bring her the terrible news that she now was the last survivor of her genin team. And she was only about to turn 19. For all of their posturing about emotional restraint, or because of it, Uchiha's emotions fed into their strength all too easily. And feeding emotions into strength was exactly what Sasuke did. He remembered the feeling of seeing Toru die. Of the emptiness when Naruto had disappeared forever, seconds after that. He thought of Hinata crying after Shino's death. How she would have to mourn the rest of her team. He thought of the ever-stoic Itachi, crying for their father. Of his mother breaking down, when she thought nobody could see. He thought of his father, murdered in his own home. Flames erupted in a pillar around him, burning the unlucky shinobi next to him and turning the archer's projectiles to liquid steel. The inferno raged around him, a wall of almost solid fire, whose heat and anger didn't burn him. Even when the flames licked him, it was only a comforting glow. Water jutsu. Hurry! Midori screamed, her throat dry and her lips chapped. Unfortunately, there were only a few ninja in Suna that were truly good at using water style, and none of them were here. The three that could use it at all still tried. Water style, cutting edge. Water style, violent water wave. Water release, water whip. Of course, using water style in an area as dry as the cliffs around Kinwar was already very difficult to begin with. Now, add to that the flames burning away what moisture still remained in the atmosphere. The three jutsu that flew at the man standing in the middle of the blaze were weakened to start with. Two of them just disappeared before even reaching him. The violent water wave hit a wall of flame, one that almost appeared to be solid. The jutsu steamed away as well. What's up with that? She thought. They didn't behave like actual flames. If anything, it reminded her more of San's previous Jinchuriki, Gaara, and his sand shield. The Uchiha swung his sword, and a hiss followed. Several of her men died, burned to a crisp by the wave of flame that followed. Two more rushed in, trying to attack him in melee range. Fools. Don't. She tried. They died too, and only ashes remained. Some tried to fall back on the initial plan. Running away. The Uchiha closed his eyes in focus, and some of the flames around him faded away. Midori could feel the chakra build up. His sword. That's where the flames are produced. She wanted to scream the warning to her troops, but knew it didn't matter in the slightest. Malevolent wind chakra spread from the Uchiha. The next instant, a ring of fire extended, following the trail the wind had left. A ring of fire prevented them from leaving. One man crashed into it, dead before his charred body even emerged from the other side. Fight him then. For Aki. For Suna. She shouted. Death was nothing to Suna Shinobi. Death was nothing to Suna Shinobi. Death was nothing. They attacked, sweeping in from all sides. There were less flames to shield him now, since he was using them to maintain the ring of fire. The only flames that remained around him were covering his arms and his sword. Uchiha Sasuke dodged a steel sword, moving only an inch. His sword cut through a man. He blocked another stab by grabbing the woman's wrist, throwing her over his shoulder before stabbing down through her throat. Midori was not a very strong fighter. That's why she froze. Suna ninja did not fear death. The Uchiha maneuvered, ducking, weaving, dodging, cutting, burning. Even the arrows, he saw coming, no matter which side they came from. Flames extended the length of his sword, until it was as tall as he was. The Suna ninja advanced again, explosive tags raining down, the sound of explosions almost deafening. Nothing. He stood there, unscathed. He swung his sword. The screams were horrifying. Wind style was out of the question. They would just fan his flames. Uchiha dropped 3 other men. Stop it, please. Somebody whimpered. Was it her? Please. Let us retreat. She heard herself say. Uchiha Sasuke gave her a cold look. Did you give our men mercy? Aye. What about your own citizens? He asked again, cutting through another man. Please. Mercy. She repeated, voice dry. You showed none. Not for my father, either. We didn't. She rasped out. Please. That's right. He snorted. Nobody did. Not Suna. Not Yamanaka Ino either. He steeled himself, even more chakra pouring into the air. His face strained. I guess that's what war is like, then. Uchiha said. We didn't kill him. Was what she had meant to say. Flames erupted from his sword, and he swung one last time. Her world became fire. She wondered if Uchiha Suzuki stood on the edge of the cliff. Hours later, Kakashi next to him, after the man had recovered some. He started at the burnt remains of the city. And he avoided looking at the pile of burned Suna ninja corpses another time. He had already had plenty of time to do that already. I'm sorry, Kakashi. He said. Don't. He said, his mask off, and a faraway look into his eyes. You did as well as you could have. I owe you my life. If I had come earlier. If I had just managed. Don't go there. He looked at him. Over the years, I have lost many, many people. Sometimes by my fault, sometimes not. Today's not on you. Suzuki snorted. I could have saved them. Just a few seconds earlier and I dash. You were on the other side of the land of wind. That you came so quickly is a testament to your ability, and the toads. Suzuki hesitated. I fell for their trap. Kakashi said, eyes blank. If it's anyone's fault, it's mine. I didn't expect Suna to start the war so harshly. They will blame Konoha for the destruction. Suzuki said. Won't they? Kakashi nodded. They will, undoubtedly. What do? We start by picking the corpses up. Ours first. Their remains. Most Suna ninja were burned beyond recognition. A good chunk of the others had detonated themselves, too, and not much was left of them. Same thing went for the Konoha ninja. Kakashi closed his eyes. Yes. Let us start sealing them away. It's going to be some time before the next Konoha team arrives. Kakashi walked away, but said nothing when he didn't follow right away. If anybody could understand. Well, Kakashi would. He really hoped the man didn't blame himself too harshly, but didn't know what to say. Suzuki stared at nothing. Many thoughts warred inside his head, now that he was away from the fighting. His father's murder. Ino's involvement. The foreigner. He didn't let himself fall to the blind rage that threatened to follow, as it always did. His time with Jiraiya, and the need to keep the one-tail quiet had made him able to take some distance from unwanted emotions. Suzuki would find them. Then he'd get his answers. And he kept thinking about today's battle. He could still hear the screams of the dying men and women. Even when he closed his eyes, his Sharingan showed him their deaths in perfect clarity. Forever. This was the real curse of the Uchiha. Chapter 58, Tales from the Front. As usual, the reasons behind war were a bit more muddled than what every country would tell its citizens. Most of the complexity came from the intertwined alliances, and the complicated history, between each of the great villages. Suna had recently built a tentative alliance with Kiri. Kiri skirmished with Kumo. Kumo and Konoha had been allies for more than a decade, now. Iwa was apparently trying to stay out of it as much as possible, despite having trade agreements with Suna. They were allied with AIM, though, which meant that the fighting between Suna and Konoha would have to take place outside of Rain Nation's borders. They clearly had learned their lesson well from the Second War, which had ruined the country of Rain. Instead, the fighting would have to be contained in either the Land of Wind, the Land of Fire, or the Land of Rivers, whose only ally was Taki, north of Konoha. The fighting between Kumo and Kiri was getting worse by the day. In an effort to keep the battles somewhat restrained, but mostly to avoid kick-starting the Fourth Great War, Konoha and Kumo had agreed to let the other fight their own battles. Now, there were a few complications. Because of old tensions, and a real bloodbath, Konoha and Iwa were likely never going to get along. This was one of the main reasons Oniki had sought an alliance with Nagato, the leader of Rain. Because if there ever was a nation who had a reason not to want Konoha to grow too strong, it would be their non-ally neighbor. In a way, both of these two countries wanted to keep the current balance of power in the elemental lands, because if no country became dominant, then they wouldn't have the might to challenge IWA. Then they wouldn't be able to prevent Rain from amassing more power. When the fifth Hokage was assassinated, Konoha demanded heavy reparations from Suna. Because the poison that had been used had obviously come from there. Suna didn't accept, proposing their own trade terms, which were judged greedy by the top Konoha brass. Konoha declared war. Rumor had it that Suna would have done it themselves otherwise, their Kazekage's daughter having been kidnapped. They blamed Konoha for the deed. Just as they blamed them for destroying the city of Kin, along with hundreds of civilians, days later. Konoha's copy ninja, as well as Konoha's living flame, were accused. Konoha refuted the accusations, blaming Suna instead. Suna called it preposterous. It had been one of their most important cities. Nevertheless, a Jinchuriki had made use of its Biju's power. Whether this was done in retaliation or not, the conflict would escalate quickly. Kiri mobilized part of their army to show support for Suna. They didn't mobilize fully, of course, trying to avoid a full-on war with Kyumo. Of course, Kyumo being Kyumo, and seeing Kiri mobilize an army, declared war on them anyway. The land of hot water, being their unfortunate neighbor, and an easier place for Kiri troops to reach, compared to the land of lightning's extensive defensive line along the coasts, got dragged into the conflict right away, because Kiri declared war on them. Many people didn't realize what that meant right away, until the results were right in front of them. Thus did the Fourth Great War begin. He was Uchiha Itachi, 54th head of the Uchiha clan. And it was a role that had been thrust upon him, not one he had wanted. He excelled at the shinobi arts, not diplomacy. Oh, he could understand the game just fine, but sorting the chaos, keeping everything under control, making peace with his father's old enemies, keeping the alliances with the other clans up and running, building new ones. At the very least, this wasn't Sasuke's cross to bear. He hid a smile, thinking of his strong, smart, impulsive younger brother. No. He was the clan head. Because there was no one else. Still, sitting through every meeting, placating to the angry whims of people twice older than he was. Leading the very traditional clan to a more progressive future. Going through the motions, while making sure that the clan loved him about as much as they had loved his father. He sighed. He would rather be on the field. Just like Shisui was. Just like Toru was. Just like Sasuke was, as well. Somehow, things were more straightforward there. Unfortunately, clan heads were seldom sent away, their main role being, of course, leading the clan. Itachi wondered what his father would have done. The land of wind was prettier than Shisui remembered. Sure, when people thought of beautiful environments, many of them, and even more so if they happened to be from Konoha, thought of lush trees, shrubs, rivers and other greenery. But anybody who had wandered around a little bit more was likely to come to enjoy the different kinds of beauties and wonders the world had to offer. This was even more true for a shinobi. Just keeping in mind the fact that there was still so much beauty out there, was enough to keep a man going for a bit longer. The Sharingan made sure you never forgot anything you saw. This was the reason Shisui and of course, Toru, then liked to also take in some nice sights, to balance it out. The desert tended to be overlooked, its true beauty unseen. But there were some awe-inspiring sights one could see in the desert. A vast expanse, a timeless space of wonder and longing. The dry heat, the shimmery orange nature of it. Some beautiful flowers could be found only in the desert. And any flower that could grow in this kind of place was said to be strong. So yeah. Shisui liked the desert. Check it out, check it out. Yeah, he liked the desert. Bro, come on. Look. A red-hot flame burst out of his brother's mouth. Straight into the open crater. It started to burn, red, looking like a gateway to hell. Damn, did you know even the desert could burn like this? Toru asked. Shisui let out a pained laugh. Leave it to Toru to break a solemn moment. It's a flammable pocket of gas. He said, doing his best Itachi impression. I think. Ah, yeah, that would explain it. It seems to burn forever, doesn't it? Shisui scoffed. What, with this kind of half-assed flame? Maybe if we poured some oil on it. Oh yeah. Toru laughed. Let's see you do better, then. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Shisui-sama has responsibilities, now. Can't be seen setting things on fire anymore. You little twerp dash. Do it. I know you want to. He sighed, checking if there was anybody around, besides their team, and they were already giving them bemused looks. There wasn't anybody else. He held one of his hands in the tiger seal, and blew out a flame that easily dwarfed Toru's. Nice. Toru said, eyes bright. And that's how you do it. Shisui rubbed his nose. Toru really brought the worst out of him. Then again, he knew that Toru was also doing it to keep from worrying too much about what was coming. And what had happened already. Fugaku-sama's death, Yamanaka Ino, and the foreigner's involvement in it. The coming fights. The flames roared blue for a second, before settling back to orange-red. Uchiha were pyromaniacs, according to rumor. Maybe there was some truth to it. Anyways, their mission had been completed already, and the few Suna scouts had sent ahead in this region, already done with. It had been a simple evacuation mission, getting people from the villages across the frontier to the land of rivers to move away. Konoha would take care of sheltering them. And there'd be a heavy financial incentive for useful people to remain. He was not sure why he was needed here exactly, when he could be out there fighting like Kakashi was, but he figured that his reputation was likely to keep smaller Suna forces away from here, for the time being. Or maybe Danzo just wanted to keep him away from the village and from him. He had this feeling sometimes. Well, in the meantime, before he got assigned something more dangerous, he'd enjoy spending some time with Toru. Even if the rest of their team gave them weird looks. Shikamaru sighed. He never thought he'd miss Ino, but he did. Not that Sai was lacking, when it came to compatibility. They didn't have as good coordination between them as they did with Ino, but even then. His ninjutsu was useful, and he was as trained as any member of Danzo's Onumbu section route. He was smart, efficient, and focused on the mission. The problem? Sai was just annoying. Not in the same bossy way Ino had been, though. And boy, she really had been, when trying to become a Jonin before she turned 18. She had missed the mark by a few months, but now all three of them were elite ninja, thanks to her pushing, prodding, and her drive to become stronger. Shikamaru was pretty sure that half of it came from seeing Sarutobi Naruto, one of his generation's most talented, die so suddenly at 13. Toru and Sasuke had seemed to react in similar ways, focusing more and more on the shinobi arts. Kakashi. Well, he had seemed to take it as more unwanted confirmation that he was a walking curse. He had trained Toru one-on-one, but never got too close to his last student. That time had passed. According to Toru's whining, at least. And now, Ino was accused of killing the Hokage. Or at least, administering the deadly poison. Neither he, Koji or Asuma believed it, frankly. Not just because it came out of nowhere, that was basically any good assassination, but she stood to gain nothing from it, and had no particular reason to do it, either. The Sixth had tried to get information from her, apparently, and found nothing. Of course, he knew as well as anyone that trying to get information from a Yamanaka was akin to pulling teeth. Especially one as stubborn as Ino. Then again, the fact that she hadn't been willing to reveal what had happened in the Hokage's room according to Danzo, at least meant that there was something she didn't want to tell. Danzo had taken this as confirmation she had been responsible for the murder. Shikamaru, on the other hand, thought it was more likely something to do with the foreigner. Indra. The fact that both of them appeared in the bingo book, the day after they both disappeared from the village, was only confirmation. Now, what did Ino have to do with him? While he believed that she was not the one to murder the Hokage, he and his team had fought to defend her. Well, there was no denying that she was hiding something. Something important, if she was willing to become the village's enemy for it. The only way for him, Koji and Asuma, to know, would be talking to her. Which would be easier if anybody had seen Ino in the last month. Or this Indra guy? Next to him, in a dark alley, Koji, his face hidden under a nondescript peasant's cowl, motioned to him. I think we've been spotted. Koji said. How they did it? Neither of them knew, as it was already dark out. Shikamaru gave him a flat look. I told you so. Their third member, Sai, just gave them a blank and utterly false smile. Let's go, then, fatso, deadbeat. He said, starting to draw cat-like creatures on his scroll. The 7 beasts leaped from the paper, growing to life size, and ran toward the enemy. Around them, the citizens scrambled away in panic. What did you call me? Koji's eyes bulged. Sai ignored him. Koji. Keep your anger for the enemy. Shikamaru said. Koji grumbled but seemed to agree anyway. He ripped his disguise away, revealing typical Akimichi armor. They were in the middle of a small city in the land of rivers, called Nawake, looking for Suna ninja. They did so easily enough, but hadn't realized how many were there in the first place. Being inside of a city also meant Koji wouldn't be able to use his most powerful techniques. His hand expanded in size, several times over. Empty crash. He slammed it down in the middle of the street. The resulting shockwave made some of the Suna ninja lose their footing. At the same time, Shikamaru weaved a couple hand seals. Shadow possession technique. His shadow stretched out of the alley, meeting-sized tigers. He didn't bother restricting their movements, simply using them as stepping stones to reach the enemy. Completed. Sai, kill them. Sai said nothing, already moving. His animated creatures leaped away, keeping other Suna ninja busy. His tanto flashed into his hand, and with 4 clean jugular strikes, the number of enemies they were facing suddenly dropped. Shikamaru winced, releasing his shadow possession technique a bit too late not to get the feedback of having his throat slashed open. Beyond the town's fountain, he could hear the sounds of fighting. Flames rising, explosions, screams. That was where some of the other Konoha ninja were. Sai whirled around. Behind. Shikamaru dodged under a blade, his shadow strangling a young woman from Suna who had thought she could sneak from behind them. He held the bind until he was sure she was dead. He nodded in thanks to Sai. There were more Suna ninja pouring in the streets. Most civilians had left, it seemed. Good. Koji. Coast's clear. He shouted. The Akimichi nodded. Multi-size technique. He jumped high, then became gigantic. When he hit the floor, the entire city shook. The city's fountain exploded, water spilling everywhere. They would likely run into a lot of trouble with the land of rivers, once this war was over. Koji would manage, Shikamaru reassured himself. At this size, it was true that he was a bigger target. But what was also true was most attacks would barely register, and he would force the enemy to focus on him. Which left Shikamaru, Sai, and Asuma free to get rid of them. Speaking of. Where is Asuma? He had come here with them, but they hadn't seen him in a while. Did he run into some trouble? A house fell, 2 blocks away. That was where Asuma had gone. Sai, I'm going to check it out. He nodded, focused on summoning more of his ink creatures. Shikamaru ran. Rising from the building, covered from head to toe by dust, and surrounded by corpses, Asuma threw his ruined flak jacket away. Shikamaru. He simply said, breathing hard. Sensei. Shikamaru called, old habits die hard. Are you okay? The man chuckled. I've had better days. He turned serious. But. I think you guys should leave. Right now. What? This is above your pay grade. Mine too, honestly. He let out a weak chuckle. A woman came out of the rubble, a small fan in hand, a half-mask covering the top of her face. Behind her, 10 Suna ninja, all of them armed to the teeth, swarmed. She chuckled, and bowed theatrically to Shikamaru. Then she motioned for her men to stop. Who is she? Shikamaru asked. Behind him, Koji and Sai killed the last few ninja in the town center. Bad news. Asuma said, simply. Welcome. I hope you'll enjoy the show. She laughed. The woman's fan disappeared in the knot that held her obi. Her hands extended in front of her. Koji and Sai were running toward them. Shikamaru looked around. Black threads seemed to fly around in the corners of his vision. The threads disappeared under the rubble, and behind dead bodies. He heard a cracking sound. Then a popping. A corpse stiffened. Then another. And another. They stood up slowly, rigidly, in positions that looked like they would belong more on wooden dolls than dead people. More corpses joined, as the woman hummed. The Suna ninja waited behind her, their faces carefully blank. What? What the hell is this? Koji asked, disgusted. Sai frowned. That's 100 hands, Chigusa. Asuma gritted out, and Shikamaru's eyes sharpened in recognition. But she's not much more than a grave robber, really. Chapter 59, River Escape Plan. The corpses started moving, eyes glassy. They were fast. Shikamaru barely managed to dodge under their twisted arms. And hard to predict, too, since they bent in ways the human body simply wasn't meant to. The woman, Chigusa, was barely moving, with only her fingers twitching. Asuma was breathing hard. He was likely at the end of his stamina. Definitely not a fight they wanted to take, then, that much was clear. Shikamaru blurred into motion, his hands weaving signs fast, faster than he had even thought he could. Shadow art, shimmering darkness. The shadows around him seemed to flash for a second, before interlocking together. Everything in a radius of 15 meters was trapped. He released Asuma, who blew a cloud of flammable smoke right away, and then his teammates. Shikamaru grunted in exertion. Move away now, sensei, Sai. No matter how he tried, he couldn't use the chakra threads she had likely woven to catch her too. Something about her technique was different from most Suna puppeteers. On the other side of the cloud, Chigusa laughed. Oh, Anara, then. It's been a long while. It will make for a delightful show. You can have some of my puppets. Asuma nodded toward Shikamaru, taking the opportunity to turn tail. Sai did as well. Koji. On it. He grew his hair around himself, a defense doubling as an offense. Spiked human bullet. He rolled forward, the wind blades thrown around so freely by the Suna ninja not even slowing down his destructive attack. Shadow art, shadow passage. Shikamaru sunk into the shadows, reappearing a few seconds later inside a small house full of dark corners, just a few meters away. Hopefully, nobody had been able to follow him. He carefully hit his chakra signature, and released a long breath. He had never had the best stamina to begin with, but the shadow passage was especially bad for him. Sweat poured down his forehead. He swallowed a soldier's pill. Koji continued his assault, rolling back and forth through the city, and its buildings. Yeah, they were definitely going to have some trouble with the land of rivers. Chigusa laughed merrily. Shikamaru felt a hand on his shoulder. He whipped around, a shadow shaped like a spike following his hand. He stopped. It's me. Asuma whispered. Sensei. His eyes hardened. Could be anybody. When dawn fades into day, all that is left is the harsh burn of man's wool. Asuma nodded. Sure, sure. It's me. Shikamaru let out a breath. How the hell do we get out of here? He muttered. Asuma laughed sheepishly. I wanted to ask you that, actually. Shikamaru sighed. Time to think. There were a few things he could use here. A ninja he had seen this morning, and Ino's gossip. Okay, it seems as though they don't have sensors, considering they haven't found us yet. Let's exploit what I know. Here's what I think could work. Sai was hiding behind a ruined house, not so far away from Shikamaru and Asuma. He drew a few snakes, 2 small birds and a large bear. He waited before using any of them, but kept the scroll on hand, in case he needed them right away. He checked his remaining equipment. 4 kunao in his pouch, 5 shuriken and a flashbang. Only the flashbang might come in handy, if only thanks to Shikamaru. Far away, Koji was still rolling, twisting, and turning. The young man might have been stupidly soft-hearted for a shinobi his age. But there was no denying he was a useful ally to have. And an useful distraction. Now, how to get them out of here? Sure, he could likely leave on his own, but Danzo-sama would likely be very, very unhappy about losing such assets as them. Besides, leaving was only possible if they had a distraction such as Koji, one that forced the enemy to pay attention. He let two of his snakes slink into the shadows. Maybe he could thin their numbers, at least. In front of him, the shadows seemed to twist in strange ways. What is this? He stared blankly. They seemed to twist into kanji? Oh. That was Shikamaru trying to communicate, then. Sai read the missive and winced. This might prove a bit more complicated than the Nara made it seem. Rain started to fall. It was never as bad as within the land of rain's borders, of course, but rivers had frequent bouts of drizzle. That was how it came to be known for its overflowing rivers, after all. Two of these surrounded the city, in fact. Kankuro hated rain. Maybe it was because Suna was about as dry as it got. Maybe it was because the day he rushed to the place where Tamari had last been sighted, close to the land of fire's borders, it had rained too. And now, they were at war. Wherever she was, and he didn't want to even admit the possibility of anything else but her being detained in these leaf bastards' high-security prisons, he hoped she was well. In a way, she had been his only sibling. Gaara. Gaara was a complicated story. He had been a shy child, long, long ago. One that was desperate for affection. Kankuro had tried, maybe not as much as Tamari did, but he had tried. But, he had only been a child himself. What was he supposed to think of a kid that might or might not injure or kill everybody around him if he ever lost his temper? He had seen it happen, multiple times, in fact. So sure, Gaara had been a victim of their father's attempts at gaining more power. He had also been someone to be wary of. And that was before the Yoshimaru incident. After this, even Tamari grew more distant. Gaara before was unstable, but well-meaning. Gaara after, was a complete lunatic. Truth be told, he had let out a sigh of relief when he had heard he was dead, no matter how cruel that might sound to anybody who hadn't known the boy. Tamari had blamed him for it, he knew. What else was he supposed to do? Being around Gaara was like having your head on the chopping block, waiting around the whims of a cruel executioner. Their father. Raza had raged, and raged when he had heard the news. Not because his son was dead, of course. But because these leaf bastards and this demmed Hokage's son had made him, and Suna by proxy, a laughing stock. Stealing the Biju, weakening Suna, denying doing it willingly in the first place, and then showing off their almost perfect Jinchuriki, when Suna couldn't manage to even get a half-decent one, trained by one of the world's most competent seal masters. It was no wonder that Raza hated Uchiha Fugaku. Kankuro wasn't surprised Konoha blamed them for the murder. Truth be told, he thought his father had done it himself, even though he had never bothered answering the question. And now, they were at war. The only time Gaara could have done something useful for them, and joyfully at that. And he was dead. It was pretty ironic. Not very funny, though, Kankuro thought. More and more, he was prone to making dark jokes. They were scouring the village, looking for the last four-leaf ninja. He had managed to kill two of them today already, and he kept their headbands in his stash. The fat bastard, Anakamichi, had stopped spinning and gone into hiding as well, apparently. The city was eerily silent. The dead people creeping around, courtesy of Chigusa-sama, really did not help. Kankuro held back a shiver. A while later, a ninja of his platoon, Jiro, called to him. Found one. One of the Konoha rats. Kankuro asked, even though it was the only thing that could possibly fit. Yes. The tracks lead to a house. We have it surrounded already. Good. Kankuro approved. Lead us there. Once he made it there, he realized that house was a bit misleading. The whole area looked as though it had been flattened. No building was left standing, except for this ruined thing. Jiro had been right, there were 4 different sets of feet in the dust, all of them leading to the house. The 4-leaf ninja were in. He double-checked the tracks, in case any of them had decided to use them as a trap. The weight, as well as the way the dust has moved around, seems to fit. Kankuro nodded. They didn't backtrack over their steps. It wouldn't be the first time Leaf Ninja did it, far from it. Good job, Jiro. Thank you. He nodded. Send in the puppets, in case they have trapped the place. Yes, sir. 5 wooden dolls came out of scrolls, with a puff of smoke. Chakra threads spun in the air, attaching to the many joints of the puppets, including the seals that allowed them to see through its eyes, in a rudimentary way. Kankuro motioned for them to go in. One puppet blocked the northern part of the house, its master hiding in the window of the house behind. One to the south. 3 went through the only door, to the west. Morsuna Ninja waited to the east, in case. Karasu, Kankuro's puppet, walked in slowly, silently. Nobody was on the first floor of the small house, the only thing that remained there were bloodied tracks. One of them had been wounded, then. Karasu motioned up to the 2 other puppets. It had been night when the battle had started. Now, Kankuro could see the dawn rising, even through his puppet's eye. The first rays of sun came through the broken window upstairs, as Karasu slowly climbed, with the only sound being its creaky joints. There. First floor. The 4 Konoha ninja were huddled up, around a black and white thing. Was it a bird? The puppets rushed to them, poisoned blades drawn. The bird leaped through the window of the attic, and Kankuro heard the glass shatter before Sarutobi released a fire jutsu. An explosion consumed the house. The 4 Konoha ninja flew away, as fast as the strange creature would allow, straight to the sky. Karasu, as well as 3 of the puppets, were turned into ash, as the fire raged. To the skies. They're on the bird. But they were flying too high, too fast for them to reach. Where was Chigusa-sama? Kankuro ran, letting somebody else take care of their wounded. He was following the bird, who was getting higher and higher. He had no projectiles that could reach that far up. What are you doing? Chigusa called from afar. Up there, you fool. I'm trying. Chigusa extended her hands, black threads of chakra twisting and turning. She made a swiping motion toward the bird. Kankuro didn't see what happened exactly, but one of its wings started to fall off. There. That should slow them. Chigusa-sama. A man appeared, in Suna's garb, complete with a face mask. Kankuro thought he had seen him yesterday afternoon, before the fight started. He seemed exhausted, his pale face drawn, sweat running down from his forehead. Don't you see I'm busy catching some rats? She asked, tone harsh. That was dangerous. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the man continued. Go on. Spit it out. The man hesitated. Sasori of the Red Sands has been spotted leaving through the eastern gate. Kankuro froze. Compared to Chigusa's reaction. That was nothing. What did you say? Every word came out clipped. If anybody had any reason to hate Sasori, Chigusa was pretty high on the list, Kankuro knew. Sasori has been SP-. Are you certain of what you're saying? She asked again. Fury bled into her voice. If you're wrong, it's your life. Certain, Chigusa-sama. That's him, undoubtedly. The man nodded, afraid but resolute. Lead the way. Certainly. Kankuro. Chigusa shouted. You and Jiro take care of the 4-leaf shinobi with your team. Sarutobi Asuma is with them. Jiro hesitated. Chigusa snorted. Who cared about that? He's weakened. Even you fools should be able to handle him. She left at that, following after the masked man. Sasori was way more important than their former Hokage's son. Sasori and her had been students under the same master, a long time ago. They had been friends, even though Sasori had always been, off and away. Nobody had known how bad, at the time, though. It only really came to light when he betrayed the village, becoming a missing ninja before he was even 18. And then he came back. To kill their Kazekage. Oh, nobody could confirm, but she knew his methods. Poison the victim and make the body disappear. She had tried telling people about it, but there was no conclusive evidence, of course. Kiyoshi-sensei had left soon after that himself, leaving her to fend for herself, her training incomplete, putting her in the tricky position of being closely affiliated with Suna's worst traitor, and a man who abandoned his village in its darkest hour, instead of helping it grow, as he should have. She had to try twice as hard as anyone else to rise through the ranks. Everything she had earned through sweat and blood and tears. Kiyoshi was dead now. She had nothing more to say to him, anyway. And Sasori? Well, she would do him the honors of killing him herself. She noticed the masked man slow down. Chigusa-sama. He breathed hard. I can't go on, I'm sorry dash. Point me toward him, then, you fucking weakling. She shouted, her control over her nerves frayed. She was not amused anymore. At all. The man did what she asked him to do, before falling against a building to catch his breath. The bird flew clumsily with only one wing. Well, it was losing altitude every second. Even then, it managed to get out of the city. Kankuro and his team rushed to follow after it, weapons flying, and occasionally striking true. The bird crashed down into one of the two rivers that flowed around the city, before dispelling into a pool of black ink. The 4 Konoha ninja disappeared under the rapids. Kankuro cursed, as they were forced to go around the waterfall. They were losing so much time. Almost a half hour later, they caught onto them, when some branches prevented them from swimming further away. Well, their uniforms, to be more precise. What? Kankuro approached, suspicion rising. He went through the first jacket. Nothing in it. No fucking way. His men did the same. Nothing. Nothing of value inside the pants either, sir. A sandal dangled from a branch, the current making it wobble, bob up and down. Almost tauntingly. There was no way the leaf bastards would take the time to remove their valuables from their clothes, if they planned on leaving with them. There was no way any of them would bother removing their clothes while being carried away by the cold river's rapids. Simply no way. But something, or someone had been wearing these clothes. This was no clone, either. They would have dispelled a while ago, considering the amount of damage they took during their short flight. Something had been disguised to look like the Konoha ninja. And this something had disappeared already, leaving only clothes behind. Toward the eastern gate, the man wearing the Suna garb, as well as their face mask, slumped down against a wall. He removed the mask, revealing Nara Shikamaru. Cold sweat had run down his face, and his back. He let out a sigh. This had been way more risky than the sort of plans he tended to favor. But he had to get Chigusa out of the way. Asuma and Koji were too recognizable, and Sai was not really suited for what this required. Worst case, he would have tried a close-range shadow binding, buying the others some time to run, or try one last time to kill her. Because with her around, they would have died, no doubt about it. Shikamaru had a pretty decent memory, he knew as much. So when he had heard the woman's name, it jumbled a memory about her old teacher, and her teammate, whose name he actually could remember. Suna's big traitor. The rest was mostly assuming, but he had been confident in his guess. Thanks, Ino. He muttered. Who'd have thought that this sort of useless information would come in handy? Not him, that was for sure. The plan was simple. Lead Chigusa away with the lure of Sasori being around, which of course, he wasn't. Who the hell knew where that guy was now, or if he were even alive in the first place? Leading the rest of the Suna troops on a merry chase had been workable too. Asuma's monkey summons came in handy, since they could use jutsu. Sai's jutsu worked to disguise their faces, and they had given them their own uniforms to wear. Speaking of, he had no time to waste. He removed his Suna uniform, sealed it inside his pouch, revealing the clothes he had stolen from a civilian house. He muttered a quick apology, and started running silently toward the northern gate, where he knew there was no Suna ninja currently. The rest of his team was likely doing the same, right now. Shikamaru hoped the summons were alright, too, but he was pretty confident. The monkeys could take a damn beating, or give one, as he knew very well, by now. This mission was a fucking pain in the ass. He complained to no one. Well, they were all alive and had survived another day. This, he would not complain about. Not today. Chapter 60, The Frozen Land. Don't. Please, don't. Ino begged, as if her life were on the line. Haven't you done enough? I'm sorry. It has to be done. Sakura said, her eye hard. A cruel little smirk threatened to break out, though. Karen said nothing, closing her eyes. Do what you must. Naruto waited in anticipation, arms folded. Sakura slammed her winning hand on the table, cackling madly. She and Naruto exchanged a high five. They had won again. No fucking way. Ino stood up, throwing her cards in a huff. You guys cheated. Again. We didn't. Naruto assured her. Sakura has promised not to do it again. Isn't that right, Sakura? He looked at her. I felt her surface thoughts. She stole an ace. Ino accused again. She stared at Ino, face blank. Right, Sakura. He repeated. I'm a ninja. She said simply. Naruto groaned. You five-headed b-dash, Ino dove over the table, trying to choke Sakura. Whoa. Calm down, girls. Naruto tried, to no avail. He had to physically pull Ino away from Sakura, who still held her tongue out, pulling down her lower eyelid. Let me go, Naruto. Ino screamed. I'm gonna show her what I think of cheaters. Yeah, let her go, Naruto. Sakura laughed. Karen sighed. I'm not sure we should continue playing card games. At least not as teams. That had been days ago. The group had decided to spend the night close to a small village in the Land of Frost, a smaller country nestled in between the Land of Hot Water and the Land of Lightning. Naruto hadn't had the chance to put a marker down around here or the Land of Lightning yet, so they were doing things the usual way. They had spent the last day trekking to Shimogakure, the hidden village of Frost, home to a small population of what used to be nomads. Why the hell would people decide to move here? Ino bristled, her teeth chattering. I think you're looking at the reason. Karen said, her voice muffled by the scarf she was wearing. What? Another, people move to a challenging place because it keeps them safe from other people. Ino grunted. They still have to actually live here. How is this worth it? I guess they really didn't care for people. Sakura suggested. Lightning Country used to be more aggressive dash. Even more aggressive. Naruto interjected. Truth be told, he wasn't feeling really cold, himself. They still are. Well, he was almost twice the weight of Ino, so no wonder. Yes, same thing. Sakura shrugged. But it makes sense people would rather leave to the icy desert than face their angry neighbors dash. Dick swinging contests. Naruto finished. Yes. That. She said, amused. How are you guys warm enough for these shitty jokes? Ino managed to let out, her mouth feeling sluggish. Naruto shrugged. Uzumaki thing, maybe? I got it from my mother. Nah, that's not it. Karen said dryly. I'm also freezing. I keep cycling chakra. Sakura said. What do you think I'm doing? Ino replied. I might just be better at it than you. It would just be yet another thing on a long list. Sakura said, humbly. See? I'm helping. The anger will keep you warm. If it's about chakra control, I don't think I would manage. Naruto decided to interrupt. I feel fine, though. He could go on for a while. He turned to look at them. All right. Maybe not, then. Ino seemed like she was on the verge of falling down, and Karen was not looking too good, either. Okay, girls. Let's set up camp here. Camp? In the middle of the desert? Do you want us to die? Ino asked. Heh. Naruto laughed. I just remembered you never saw us camped outside of inns. Which they really should be wary about, since half of them were wanted people, even though it was just in the Land of Fire for now. Thinking about it, maybe people in IWA would offer them drinks. No Hokage had ever been liked by IWA and... Nah, bad idea. Karen. Show her, please. Sakura said. Sure. She rubbed her hands together. Let me warm my fingers, though. It feels like they're going to fall off. Yeah. Maybe a break was a good idea. They didn't have to reach Shimo today. As for the reason they were heading there, rumor had it that Mist was currently sending their Jinchuriki, the host of the Six Tails, not Yagura himself, to the land of hot water. Naruto had heard about the first Hokage's idea of mutually assured destruction. Well, he didn't call it this way, but that's what it was, in the end. It turned out handing out Biju had just made conflict more destructive in the end. And Kyumo was not going to let Kiri's Jinchuriki rampage their way through their shinobi. Now, Mist had many ways they could go around the islands to bring the Six Tails to the battlefield. Lightning, on the other hand, was very likely to go through the land of frost, and have their Jinchuriki spend a night in Shimo. If Naruto knew this, through Orochimaru's spies, then Akatsuki knew it too. If they resumed their poaching, the Two Tails was a great place to start. For the same reasons, Orochimaru and Anko would try to keep an eye on the Six Tails. Fu, apparently, was now locked inside Taki. Which meant they would likely not go for her now. They had people tracking the others, but they were mostly behind village walls as well. Of course, a lot of this was based on assumptions, but that's all they had to go by. The Three Tails and the Eight Tails were too precious to risk on the battlefield right away. They would not come out without a good reason. The One Tails, held by Uchiha Sasuke, was seen around Jiraiya more often than not, and was more than able to defend himself on top of that. Not the easiest of targets, all in all. So that was the broad outline: track the Jinchuriki likely to get stolen away, wait for Akatsuki, track Akatsuki, kill or capture, if possible Akatsuki. Easy enough. To Karen, recognizing a Jinchuriki would be child's play, no matter if they were trying to hide. Same went for S-rank ninja. If they were fighting, she would be able to track them from dozens of kilometers. And she would remember them, forever. Like he did. But better. While Naruto was musing, Karen got ready. Snake. Rat. Ox. Ram. Snake. Earth release, stone pillar house. Ino blinked. The snow rumbled, falling away, as the ground seemed to rise. No, that was wrong. The minerals of the earth were forced together, blended into a large, square stone pillar. Some of the rocks fell away, until it revealed a single-story house with no windows. It was too cold to bother. It wouldn't win any awards, but it looked livable, especially in this barren land. Ah. That's how UMI grew so fast. Ino breathed out, as a crude door opening appeared. Now you get it. Karen grinned from the top of the house. Heating a stone house was a bit different than heating wood, of course. Stone provided thermal mass, not insulation. Meaning it was slow to change temperature. Once it was warm though, it could stay warm for a while. And that's why we're going to use fire nature to warm it up quickly. Naruto declared, once he had finished placing seals for soundproofing, hiding most of their chakra presence and allowing for decent air circulation. Don't we need someone with a fire affinity for that? Ino asked, staring at him. Yes, absolutely. Naruto nodded. That's why we need your fire style here, Ino. He looked at her expectantly. Silence stretched. Ino stared back, as though he were the world's biggest idiot. Why do you think I can use fire style? Don't half the people in Konoha know fire release? He asked, now unsure. Sasuke could. I mean, out of 4 people. Sakura, do you know it? Nah. Karen. I'm not even from the land of fire. Also, no. Ino, you sure? Of course I'm sure. Didn't Asuma train you? He asked again. He's good at fire style things. Didn't the third train you? She shot back. He's good at everything. Including fire style. Don't you need 2 affinities to become a Jonin? I thought you were a Jonin. He accused. Not necessarily. She rolled her eyes. Also, I'm good enough with Yin Chakra that it counts, as well as Earth. Damn. He grumbled. I'm good with yin. Sakura mimed. Why don't you use your fancy illusions to make us believe the fire's burning, huh? Ino growled. Oh? As far as I know, you don't know fire style either. We'll find a way. Naruto said, weakly. Look. Someday, we're gonna look back on this and laugh. Naruto tried. If we don't die of hypothermia tonight. Ino grumbled. Think of it as extra practice. He encouraged, grinning. He had made a small fire by striking firewood, that they kept sealed away in scrolls, with lightning, absorbing the smoke in another open scroll. It was warm enough to sleep, since Karen and Sakura were both passed out on the same futon. Meanwhile, Ino was practicing transforming her chakra into fire nature, her clone doing the exact same, next to her. Ino couldn't help it. She laughed. I guess that's on me, asking for adventure. Things are really ridiculous around you. That's what the old man said, sometimes. He mused. Remember that time we tried to smoke his tobacco? She cackled. How could we have known this specific one was not supposed to be smoked in a wooden pipe, exactly? Exactly. He nodded sagely. Sarutobi had been pretty grumpy, when he had to put out the fire they had caused. Naruto started humming a tune, going back to working on a new cloak design. Didn't think you were any good at sewing. Ino or her clone said. He snorted. I'm not. I can just put things together. But I'm decent at sealing, or jutsushiki. Same thing, really, despite what Orochimaru says. She raised an eyebrow. The guy's good at what he does. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to take some inspiration from him. You wound me. He chuckled. But you could ask him, he tends to be decent at explaining things. It would go much faster. We'd have heating, too. Ino continued to nag. I know how heating works, though. Naruto shrugged. Oh. She challenged him. Didn't seem so. He sighed. There are a few ways to transmit heat. It's just energy, honestly. When you heat something, you make its molecules jiggle faster. She hadn't gone to civilian school, but she had a decent understanding of basic physics. Could have said that myself. I don't see a fire between your hands yet, though. He continued before she could retort. There's conduction. When you touch a warm object, the jiggly atoms of the object jiggle your atoms, which you then feel as heat. Ino didn't say anything. Next's convection. The warmer parts of a fluid are more buoyant than its colder parts. Hot air rises, cold air drops. Then there's radiation. Every object, no matter its amount of heat, naturally radiates it. This type of heating isn't direct like the other two. This heat energy is instead radiated as specific wavelengths of light, infrared and microwave mostly. Then it is converted back into heat when it contacts matter. Yeah? Naruto asked. Yeah. She said, blinking at the impromptu science lesson. Cool, cool. He nodded, going back to his cloak. Wait a minute. He smiled a bit. Why do you know this, exactly? Take a guess. He chuckled. You have a seal for heating things already, don't you? Ino asked, glaring. Yes, so. Naruto grinned. You could use the training, and I want to experiment with fire. She cursed. Oh, you dash. I thought you told me to take some inspiration from Orochimaru's methods. That's classic him. My seal only works for rooms, as of now, not on clothing. Naruto explained, once she had calmed down. She had settled for glaring at him. Ah, come on. He smiled. Don't be like that. You're going to be happy, once you learn fire style. Plus we don't have anyone who can use it, yet. Why don't you do it yourself? She gritted out. Because I can't. At all. Nor earth or water. He shrugged. I think it's something I might have done to myself. Ah. She said with some distaste. The experimental body carving thing. Yeah, most likely. It's too late for regrets anyway. He laughed. Plus, lightning and wind are cooler, anyway. Why do you need me to do it now, then? He stared at her, seriously. Because I have faith in your ability to learn it fast. You. Really? She said, somewhat shyly. Sure. He shrugged, likely ruining the moment. Then we can study it together and isolate fire chakra's heating nature to make our clothing able to self-regulate, by transforming a small amount of nature chakra into it, and some into wind or water for cooling. Ah. That's why I'm paying attention to how it feels. You're sewing. I'm also paying attention, sensing your changes in chakra and all. Oh. Then she realized. Did you do the same with wind chakra? The way the cloak shifts out of our way when we move is not natural, is it? He laughed. That's what I did, yes. Wouldn't want the cloak to get in our way, would we? That's kinda impressive. She said. I guess so. The fabric was kinda expensive, so I didn't want it to get cut any time I had to use my swords. You really didn't change that much, deep down, did you? She said with barely hidden fondness. Why would I? She shrugged. The shinobi world has a way of forcing people to do just that. Truth be told, he didn't believe this was entirely true. He had changed, and was continuing to do so. And he was somewhat afraid of it. Wanna hear about what I plan to do with the cloaks? He asked instead. Sure. Ino laughed. I want to do the same thing with clothing, but I'm not sure about the material yet. He mused out loud. Anyway. Lightning, I don't know what to do with it. Earth chakra transformation could make the cloak harden, so we could use it as armor, in theory. Water element has some innate flexibility, so I could make a cloak that shifts its length and dash. Ino listened with rapt attention, hanging on to his every word. Man, she must really love clothing, if she's this interested. You guys alright? Sakura asked. Ino looked like a zombie, apparently. Well, that's how she felt, at least. Did you try to sleep on the same schedule as Naruto? Karen understood. Yeah. That and the clone's exhaustion feeding back to me. I feel like a corpse. I feel pretty refreshed, honestly. We had like 6 hours of sleep. Naruto shrugged. That's not enough. Ino grumbled. For you. He teased. She balled her hands into fists. Well, excuse me, Mr. Skin Carver. If it works, it works. Behind them, once Sakura collected their possessions from inside the house, Karen collapsed it. Ready to go? She asked. They were. On the way, Sakura had to ask. So, did you make any progress with fire? Instead of answering, Ino decided to show her. She snapped her finger, creating a small spark. I guess that's a start. Sakura said with a pained smile. Say it. Say what? That it wasn't worth losing sleep over. Didn't even think it. Sakura said innocently. Fuck you, Fivehead. She's trying to provoke you. Karen supplied helpfully. This is very fast, by any standard. Thanks, Karen. And if you can channel fire nature, you should be able to heat yourself by cycling it, I think. You could try, we have a few hours before reaching Shimo. Karen continued. Ino did. Like this. She grunted. Karen felt for her chakra, to get a better idea of what she was doing. I'd say lower the intensity, you're not trying to set yourself on fire. She laughed. All right. A bit higher, I think. From what I remember, it's a bit more dash. Now. 15. 20% lower. HNG. Yeah, that should be close to it. Hey, it seems to be working. Told ya. Karen grinned. Damn, this is more useful than the Byakugan. I thought this was because half of the Hyuga clan were unhelpful dicks quoting Naruto here. I was quoting Sasuke, actually. Naruto butted in. Same thing, really. I think Hyuga and Uchiha are mad at each other because they're two sides of the same coin. Ino said. Naruto wisely didn't say anything about her and Sakura. I can feel your thoughts, Naruto. Ino shouted. Ah, yeah, true. He winced. Out of my head, please. They got inside Shimo very easily, surprisingly. The disguises and false identities had likely helped. Nothing too fancy, as they preferred to keep things simple. Switching hair colors around among themselves, random colored contacts, different hairdos, and slash or wigs. This sort of thing. But maybe Ino's genjutsu did most of the heavy lifting. Hard to say. As for Naruto's whisker marks, he just hid them with some makeup and slash or decals, the traditional way. Damn, they really eat this, for breakfast? Ino asked, once they found a place to eat. What's wrong with fatty pancakes and whipped cream? Naruto asked, arms folded. They're probably high-energy foods to warm them up for winter. Sakura supplied. I'll have double the usual portion, please. Naruto called to the waitress, a cute girl with a round face. He couldn't help but notice people were shorter than they were in the Land of Fire, with smaller hands, and flatter faces. Did it help with losing less heat? Well, he was no scientist, so he'd rather not make any wonky theories. For yourself? She asked, hesitant. It's a bit much for. She didn't say foreigner. People who are not used to it. I'm hungry. He shrugged before digging in. She nodded. How are you not the size of a house, by now? Ino wondered. Great genetics. He answered. Uzumaki heritage. Karen shrugged. Body fuckery and human experimentation. Sakura said. What? You guys know I'm right. Jealous. As always. Naruto ignored her. I'll take more bread and soup, too, please. He called to the waitress. Ino watched on, bewildered. She had struggled to finish her own plate. Karen's head lifted suddenly. I think the Kumo ninja are on their way here. It's going to be a while before they arrive, though. Oh. Naruto asked. Great. Is there Jinchuriki with them? I can't feel anything that far. Yes. The woman holds the two tails. On their way to the front lines. I think they're headed toward here, in Shimo. Otherwise, we'll have to meet them in the snow plains. Ino grumbled, and got back to practicing with her fire nature. Check the description for the links to the author.